Chapter 476. Matters for the auction. Fatty Lie returned to normal after Linny sat on the sofa, smiling as he took out a brochure from his briefcase and handed it to Lin E. "Boss, take a look at this." Lin E took the brochure from Fatty Lie and flipped through it. Auction. Lin E took a look and realized that it was a brochure introducing the auction, and the venue was Yinjing City. "That's right." Fatty Lie nodded. "But this isn't a normal auction. It's a super auction that all the noble houses attend, and it's held once a year." "Oh?" Lin E paused. He didn't expect this auction to be so influential, and Fatty Lie must have some power if he could get his hands on a brochure for this auction. "Mr. Lie is right, I know about this auction. They send me an invitation every year, but I've never attended it before." Xiaomin smiled self-deprecatingly. With Xiaomin's current status, he was the target of all the noble houses. A miracle doctor was far more useful than a profitable business partner. What was the use of money if he was dead? Therefore, in order to show how much the aristocratic families valued Guan Xiaomin, they would send him more than one invitation every year. However, Guan Xiaomin had always been an honest person, so he wouldn't charge exorbitant medical fees. Naturally, he wouldn't attend any auction. This time, Professor Guan must go. Fatty Lie said with a smile, "If I'd known that you had so many invitations and that you could bring people along, I wouldn't have wasted so much effort to get you an invitation." "Huh." Linny smiled. Fatty Lie had wanted to show off when he got the invitation, but he didn't expect Xiaomin to have several of them. He wasn't in the mood to show off right away. In this auction, only some rare treasures are being auctioned. Only the financial resources of the various aristocratic families can afford to buy these things. Fatty Lie said, "Of course, other than the traditional aristocratic families participating, there will also be some new entrepreneurs invited. These people also have a lot of potential." "You're saying that we'll be auctioning the pill of life extension and toxin cleansing at this auction?" Lin E had a rough idea of Fatty Lie's intentions. "That's right. Everyone who attends this auction is rich. As long as they're willing to chase after us, it'll be hard for our products not to be sold out." Fatty Lie said, "All right, you can decide." Lin E nodded. Since Fatty Lie was in charge, if he said it could be done, then it would be done. "It's great following you, boss." Fatty Lie was so happy that Lin E wasn't interfering at all. He almost cried again, but he managed to hold it in. "Boss, I've booked 3 tickets for tonight. We'll leave for Yinjing in a bit." "So urgent." Lin E paused. "Isn't the auction 3 days from now?" "That's for the auction. It's fine if we're just going to buy stuff, even if it's a day or 2 later," Fatty Lie said. "But we're going to sell stuff at the auction as well, so we'll have to leave early. We need to submit it in advance." "I see." Lin E nodded, following Fatty Lie's arrangements. He told Pengzhan and the Mist that he had something to do and would be away for a few days. Pengzhan, naturally, didn't say anything, but Meng Yao, on the other hand, replied nonchalantly, "Mind your identity, don't flirt with other girls." "Huh." Lin E shook his head at Meng Yao's message and called Tang Yun. Unfortunately, Tang Yun's phone was still turned off. Lin E could only send a message to Tang Yun, explaining that there was nothing going on between him and Xiao Xiao, and that he had to go to the auction in Yinjing and bring her a gift. At the same time, in Dr. Kang's house, Dr. Kong, naturally, received an invitation to the auction as well. Although House Kong wasn't even considered a low-level noble house, they were still the head of the company. Naturally, they would be part of the auction. Plus, House Kong would bring out some stuff for the auction every year. "Why's the auction early this year?" Dr. Kong looked at the invitation in his hand curiously. "Yeah, father, it's always August every year. I wonder what's up with House Yu this year." Kong Guifeng nodded, confused. Silence. Dr. Kong glared at Kong Guifeng. "House Yu's business is not something you can talk about. There's no outsiders here." Kong Guifeng knew that he said something wrong, but he still tried to defend himself. "No outsiders? It'll be bad if there are outsiders. You're putting us in a position where we can't recover from." Dr. Kong humphed coldly. "Don't even think about this in the future. We're at a crucial stage of becoming a noble house. Don't cause trouble. It's just the 2 of us now, but you're used to saying it. What if you say it out loud when you go out? Wouldn't that ruin everything?" Yes, father. I was wrong. Kong Guifeng quickly apologized. No matter why house you brought forward the auction this time, we, House Kong, still have to participate. Dr. Kong humphed. This time, I'll go with you and Xiaolong to Yinjing. We'll go to Xiao family first to propose marriage, and then we'll go to the auction. Yes, father. Kong Guifeng nodded. The items for the auction this year. Are we going to prepare the same as last year's? Yes, but we have to prepare an extra portion as a betrothal gift to Xiao family. Dr. Kong said. Prepare it as soon as possible. We'll be leaving tomorrow. Don't worry, father. Kong Guifeng nodded. Dr. Kong trusted Kong Guifeng. This eldest son was much more reliable than his youngest son. He hoped that this trip to Yinjing would not only be able to get the support of Xiao family, but also earn a fortune from the auction. Every year, House Kong would prepare a few portions of golden creation at the auction. It was highly sought after by all the noble houses, and usually sold for a sky-high price. This was also one of the sources of income for House Kong every year. However, the so-called golden creation medicine was just a normal golden creation medicine that wasn't diluted. At most, some of the ingredients were older and more effective. Chapter 477. Chapter 477. Return it to him. Xiao Xiao happily went back to school, looking for a chance to use Lin Yi's incident to attack Tang Yun. Lin Yi wasn't in school, and Tang Yun wouldn't even have a chance to confront him. La la la. Xiao Xiao started laughing happily. She walked quickly to Class 9's door, and was about to call Tang Yun out to talk to her when her phone rang in her pocket. Only Xiao Xiao dared to set her phone to ringtone in school. The others had to be careful even if it was vibrating. Jifeng had just finished checking the 12th grader's discipline, and he was walking past the hallway when he heard the ringtone. He was about to explode when he saw that it was Xiao Xiao. He lowered his head helplessly and pretended not to see it, walking away quickly. Sometimes, Jifeng felt that being the dean was a bit of a burden. There were two special students in the school that he couldn't control. One was Lin Yi, and the other was Xiao Xiao. This was 2F asterisk Ket up. He could only pretend he didn't see anything. But Xiao Xiao just had to raise her head and greet Jifeng, her voice sweet. Mr. Wang, Lin Yi has something to do these next couple of days. He can't come to school. He asked me to help him get a leave. She was standing in front of Tang Yun's classroom, not far from Tang Yun's window. The window wasn't closed, and Tang Yun heard it loud and clear. She froze. She was lying on her desk, not paying attention to what was going on outside, but she raised her head upon hearing Xiao Xiao's voice. Her heart froze when she heard that Xiao Xiao was applying for leave for Lin Yi. So, they really had something going on. Oh, okay. Wang Jifeng answered gloomily and quickly turned around to leave. Xiao Xiao's face turned cold as well. She looked at the caller ID and quickly ran to the bathroom to pick it up. What's up? Xiao Xiao, you should go to the hospital today. A middle-aged man's voice came from the other side. Hospital? What hospital? I'm going to die anyway. I'm going to waste my life there? Xiao Xiao was getting agitated all of a sudden, as if she was really against it. Didn't the doctor say that there's a chance of recovery? The middle-aged man said after a pause. Listen to their bullshit. You said mom wouldn't die, but look what happened. Xiao Xiao was even more agitated. My mom, my auntie, it's the same. You don't have time to accompany me, so please don't waste my life, okay? I'm sorry. The middle-aged man sighed. But Dad has work to do. But this time, Dad's colleague helped me contact an expert. I will send a car to pick you up later. No, I'm not going. I haven't played enough. How much time do I have left? You put me in the hospital for 2 months. How many more months do I have to waste? Xiao Xiao yelled at the other side of the phone before smashing the phone on the ground, panting with rage. The middle-aged man helplessly put down the phone in his hand. Although he also wanted to accompany his daughter often, the nature of his work gave him little time to rest 365 days a year. Xiao Xiao's chest was heaving up and down as she put her hands on the windowsill, looking at the students playing on the field. She held back the tears that were about to fall. I can't cry. I'm Xiao Xiao. Go Xiao Xiao. After calming down for a while, she heard a sound from the bathroom door. She quickly collected her emotions and picked up the phone before walking out of the bathroom calmly. Tang Yun was feeling really bad. and she didn't want to embarrass herself in the classroom. She stumbled to the bathroom to wash her face and calm down, only to see Xiao Xiao walking out. She jumped and yelped, looking at Xiao Xiao with wariness and hostility. Tang Yin didn't know what to do at a time like this, nor did she have any experience like this. At the end of the day, she was just an 18-year-old girl, a 12th grader. She'd never met a love rival before, and her mind was a blank. Xiao Xiao was much calmer than Tang Yun. She looked at Tang Yun and smiled. I'm going on a honeymoon with Lin Yi. He gave you the breakup fee, right? Xiao Xiao knew that her father would still send someone to pick her up, and Lin Yi had something to do. She disappeared as well, so she could use this chance to make Tang Yun misunderstand. He did, but I don't want it. I'll give it back to him. Tang Yun bit her lip and raised her head to look at Xiao Xiao stubbornly. Tell him that I hate him. All right, I'll tell him. Xiao Xiao blinked. Breakup fee? Why did she really give a breakup fee? What was going on? But as weird as it was, Xiao Xiao put on a look of understanding and smiled at Tang Yun. But I suggest you keep the money. I don't want it. Tang Yun looked at Xiao Xiao's back, tears welling up in her eyes. She didn't know if it was because she felt wronged, or because she was mourning this first love that died before it even started. In the afternoon, a black Audi A6L with a special plate stopped in front of Songshan's first school. Captain Feng, we've arrived. The driver reminded the middle-aged man who was resting behind the car. Oh, we're here already? That fast? The man opened his eyes, and one could clearly see the red veins in his eyes. It was obvious that he was exhausted. Turn off the air conditioner and open the window. Yes. The driver turned off the air conditioner and opened the window. The middle-aged man called Captain Fo took out his mobile phone and dialed a number. When the call was connected, he said, Xiao Xiao, I'm at the gate of your school. How many days is it this time? Xiao Xiao knew that she couldn't hide from this. Whether she rejected or not, her father would come to get her. The phone was quite sturdy, and it didn't break. Xiao Xiao's phone was a custom-made device her father gave her. It had a GPS system and was very sturdy. 2 or 3 days. It'll be quick after a checkup, and I can bring the medicine back, Captain Feng said after some hesitation. All right, wait for me, Xiao Xiao said happily. Captain Feng was confused. When had his daughter ever been this happy? Every time she went to the hospital, she'd do everything she could to convince her and even grab her. But this time... Chapter 478. Chapter 478, Marriage Proposal, Part 1. No, I'll be waiting for you then. Captain Feng was a little puzzled. What was wrong with his daughter today? Why was she acting so weird? But since Xiao Xiao wanted to come, there was no need for him to say anything else. The reason why Xiao Xiao agreed so quickly was because Lin Yi wasn't at school, and she had to leave as well. One could only imagine how depressed Tang Yun would be. Going against her? That would be a tragic ending. Xiao Xiao waved her fist and went downstairs. She saw the Audi A6L parked outside the school gates and didn't say anything as she got in the car. Xiao Xiao, the doctor this time is your dad's colleague, an expert in genetic diseases. Captain Feng waited for Xiao Xiao to get in the car before looking at her kindly. His name was Feng Tianlong, a special agent. He couldn't be by Xiao Xiao's side every day due to his work. It was a little regretful, but he didn't regret it. Since he'd chosen this path, he had to walk it down. Oh, another specialist, Xiao Xiao replied faintly. Xiao Xiao nodded faintly. She'd seen too many experts since she was young, but they'd always come back disappointed. Xiao Xiao was pretty much numb to it already. Rather than wasting time with doctors, she'd rather spend her youth and life. At least she wouldn't regret it even if she died. Tianlong shook his head. His daughter's attitude was within his expectations, and he didn't say anything else. In fact, he didn't have much confidence, but as long as there was a sliver of hope, he wanted his daughter to live healthily. The plane slowly landed in Yinjing, and Lin Yi, Fatty Lai, and Fatty Lai got off the plane and checked into the hotel Fatty Lai had booked. Boss, we're auctioning 3 pills of life extension and toxin cleansing this time. Isn't that a little too little? Fatty Lai asked carefully. Rare things are precious. Plus, it's not all for the money. It's mainly for the fame. Linny smiled. I see. Fatty Lai knew that Linny was speaking the truth, but he had his own selfish motives. If there were only 3 pills of life extension and toxin cleansing, then his chances of getting one would be a little low. If there were more, then wouldn't he still have a chance? Of course, he couldn't say this to Lin Yi, so Fatty Lai could only swallow it. With Fatty Lai's help, the procedures for the auction were easily taken care of. All they had to do was provide the auction items, the base price, and so on, and the auction would be completed. Even the organizer of the auction did not force the seller to go through the appraisal. The appraisal was voluntary, and one could apply for it or not. Obviously, the organizer also knew that some rare treasures couldn't be identified on the spot, and those who could participate in this auction were all celebrities. No one was willing to come up with something fake to tarnish their reputation. It was true that there were cases of shoddy goods being passed off as quality goods, but this kind of transaction would also damage the seller's reputation. As the organizer, House Yu was not a force to be trifled with. Rumor had it that a few years ago, there was a seller who passed off shoddy goods as quality goods, and House Yu ended up bankrupting him. But for Fatty Lai's unknown pill that had never been on the market before, no matter how miraculous his description was, the organizer still set a relatively low price for him. 1 million. Fatty Lai didn't want to explain further. 1 million it was. The pill wouldn't be sold for a cheap price anyway. Forget 1 million. Even if it was 100 million, he'd take it without hesitation. Yinjing City, Xiao family. Dr. Kong brought Kong Guifeng and Kong Xiaolong to visit the 2 brothers of the Xiao family, Xiao Ji and Xiao Bin. The old man of the Xiao family had passed away, and Xiao Ji and Xiao Bin had become poor kids. Although the Xiao family was still a low-class noble house, the 2 brothers were pleasantly surprised by Dr. Kang's personal visit. Dr. Kong, you could have just asked Brother Guifeng to come. Why did you come yourself? You're giving our Xiao family too much face. Xiao Ji was very excited about Dr. Kang's visit. As long as the marriage with House Kong was successful, the Xiao family would be able to get a loan from the bank, as well as the support of their business partners. By then, the situation of the Xiao family would be reversed. Isn't it just in time for House Yu's auction? So I came along. Dr. Kong smiled. House Yu's auction. Xiao Ji paused. Isn't the auction held in August every year? It's earlier this year, don't you know? Dr. Kong was taken aback as well. The Xiao family may be a low-class noble house, but they should still be invited to the auction. Why did they look like they didn't know? He knew even when he was out of town, but the local Xiao family didn't know? I know. Ha, big brother, the invitation is with me. I was dealing with the funeral of the old man, so I put this matter aside. I forgot to mention it. Xiao Bin was a smart man. After a trace of haze flashed across his face, he said with a smile. Xiao Bin was just lying. In fact, the Xiao family didn't receive the invitation, and that was what pissed him off the most. With the old man's death, they didn't send an invitation. What was House Yu thinking? I see, so it's with you. I thought they forgot about us. Xiao Ji smiled and nodded. It's brought forward. I wonder if Elder Kong has anything that you're determined to get in this auction? Well, the auction list is only released on the day of the auction. I don't know about that. Dr. Kong smiled and shook his head. Xiao Bin felt sad again. Once upon a time, when the Xiao family was at its peak, they could get most of the auction listings a few days before the auction. How awesome were he and his brother back then? When the time comes, I'll definitely get it. But now, they didn't even bother to send out an invitation. The Xiao family may be poor, but they were still a low-class noble house. How could they look down on them like this? Of course. Xiao Bin saw that his brother was about to brag about his past achievements and quickly stopped him. We probably won't be able to bid for anything when the time comes. We might not even be able to attend the auction. There's too much to do at home. Xiao Bin made up an excuse for not being able to attend. Right, Guifeng, where's our gift? Dr. Kong looked at Kong Guifeng. Here. Kong Guifeng waved at Xiaolong, who was at the door. Xiaolong quickly walked over. Uncle Xiao, second Uncle Xiao, this is a box of golden creation ointment. It's just a small gift. Xiaolong said respectfully as he presented the box politely. Chapter 479. Chapter 479, Marriage Proposal, Part 2. They wouldn't have cared about 10 million if it were any other time. But right now, they couldn't be more excited. This young man is Kong Xiaolong. right? What a handsome man. Xiao Ji said to Zhao Long as he accepted the box with a smile on his face. Uncle Xiao, I'm Kong Zhao Long. Zhao Long said politely. Yes, he's a good match for our Xinyan. Xiao Bin nodded as well, annoyed at his niece for not knowing her place. House Kong was such a powerful family. After all, why wasn't she interested? They tried to persuade her for a few days, but she still wouldn't agree. Xiao Bin and Xiao Ji were helpless. At the end of the day, Xinyan was just a distant relative, not a direct descendant of the Xiao family. They couldn't ask for anything. House arrest wasn't the way to go. They had to let her go. Xinyan's parents, on the other hand, were a bit against the marriage at first, but Wang Shubin fell silent after hearing that the man was Dr. Kang's grandson. Qinlin, on the other hand, didn't have much of an opinion. She'd been listening to Wang Shubin all these years, and now that Wang Shubin had agreed, she had no objections. The most important thing was that Xiao Ji and Xiao Bin had said that if they agreed to the marriage, they'd give up on the shares mentioned in the old man's will. But if they didn't agree, they'd take back a portion of the shares from Wang Shubin's company, and they'd threaten to ally with House Kong against his medicine company. Now, Xiao Ji and Xiao Bin were glad that Xinyan was the only one who was against the marriage. There wouldn't be any problems as long as they got through to her. Where's that Wang Xinyan? Why don't you call her out so I can see my future granddaughter-in-law? Dr. Kong asked, smiling as he sat on the sofa. As a grandfather, he was quite satisfied with this granddaughter-in-law, despite the fact that this was a political marriage. I'll go get her now. Xiao Bin gave his brother a look before walking into the living room. I say, sis, brother-in-law, did you guys really get through to my niece's thoughts? Dr. Kong himself came to our house to propose marriage. This isn't something just anyone can do. Xiao Bin said as he looked at Wang Shubin and Qinlin, who were standing in front of Xinyan's room. Little Yin doesn't agree. I think it's fine. Although Xiao Qinlin didn't have any opinions, she still loved her daughter very much. Seeing that her daughter was unhappy, she naturally didn't want to get married. Or you're a woman with long hair but short knowledge. Xiao Bin was stunned and said with some annoyance, what kind of family does Dr. Kong come from? His eldest grandson Kong Xiaolong is the future heir of House Kong. How could Xinyan lose out by marrying him? Qinlin, I've heard of this Xiaolong before. He's an excellent student, and he doesn't have a single bad habit. I've heard that he hasn't even had a girlfriend. I think he won't mistreat Xinyan, Wang Shubin said. Although he was afraid that something would happen to the company, he didn't want his daughter to be unhappy in the future, so he secretly got someone to investigate Xiaolong. The results of the investigation surprised him. Was this really a rich young master? He had been studying since he was young, and now that he had a PhD, he still had to continue his studies. Most importantly, he didn't have the habit of fooling around with women like other rich young masters. He didn't have a girlfriend since he was young. This was a world of difference between him and his cousin, Kong Mingming. So after getting the report, Wang Shubin didn't reject the marriage anymore. Where else could he find such a good son-in-law? Not only was he good at his studies, he had a good character, and most importantly, he had a good family background. With Miracle Dr. Kang's support, there was no need to worry about the development of his medicine chain company. Is that so? But little Yin doesn't like him. They've never met before. How could they have a relationship? Xiao Qinlin knew that Zhao Long was a good person, so she didn't reject him. But thinking about how her daughter didn't have feelings for him, she still hesitated. Can't feelings be cultivated? Plus, this is just an engagement. If things really don't work out, we can call it off. Xiao Bin said, right now, we're just using this marriage as an excuse to get some benefits for both of us. Let the two of them get to know each other first, and maybe they'll develop feelings for each other. I see. Xiao Qinlin thought about it. Her second brother's words made sense, but an engagement wasn't a marriage. Let the two of them get to know each other first, and if it worked out, they could stay together. If it didn't work out, they could call it off. Yeah, Dr. Kang's family is waiting outside. Hurry up and get Xinyan out. Xiao Bin was afraid that Dr. Kong would panic. All right then. Xiao Qinlin walked into the room and pushed out a dumbfounded Wang Xinyan after a while. Xinyan didn't understand. Why did her parents get convinced by her uncle and second uncle, asking her to get engaged to someone she didn't know? Her father gave her a lot of reasons, saying how great Xiaolong was, but Xin Yan didn't like him. She couldn't fall in love with someone she didn't know. Dad, is your company really that important? Xin Yan raised her head and looked at her father, hoping that he would change his mind. Wang Shubin was a little embarrassed, but the company was his life's work. He didn't want it to be ruined. I understand, Xin Yan sighed. Xin Yan sighed. I can go out with you guys, but I didn't agree to the engagement. All right, let's talk outside. Don't say anything when we get out. Maybe you'll like him just by looking at him. Xiao Bin said. Xiaolong is a rare young man. Xin Yan didn't say anything. There was no point in saying anything else. How could Xin Yan fight back when her parents had already agreed to it? How could she change? But she didn't plan on marrying a stranger. It was just an engagement, not a marriage. She'd just have to find a way to escape when the time came. Xin Yan would never accept a marriage arranged by her family. What year was this? There were still arranged marriages? Xin Yan was brought to the Xiao family's living room by Xiao Bin. Xiaolong was immediately attracted by Xin Yan's elegant figure. He didn't have a girlfriend, but that was just to show off in front of his grandpa. In fact, he'd been longing for a woman for a long time. Now that Xin Yan was officially his fiancée, Xiaolong didn't need to hide anything anymore. His family wouldn't say anything about how he treated Xin Yan. Chapter 480. Chapter 480. Cousin visits again. Xiaolong paused when he saw the flash of disgust in Xin Yan's eyes. He understood what was going on. From the looks of it, Wang Xin Yan was a girl with high standards. She wasn't like those materialistic girls who'd get excited at the sight of a rich young master like him, wanting nothing more than to throw themselves at him. But the more Xin Yan acted like this, the more Xiaolong was tempted. He wouldn't say anything if he were to marry a girl who was greedy for money, but he wouldn't be happy about it. Xin Yan's reaction was just what he wanted, and the desire in Xiaolong's eyes disappeared in a flash, returning to his previous clarity. He was a schemer, and the fact that he'd been studying so hard for so many years showed how strong his willpower was. Hello, Xin Yan. I'm Xiaolong. I hope we can get along well. Xiaolong reached out his hand and greeted Xin Yan warmly. If Xiaolong had been like this from the start, Xin Yan wouldn't have hated him as much as she did now. After all, he was a sacrifice for the family's benefit. Xin Yan wouldn't hate him even if she didn't like him. But the desire in Xiaolong's eyes showed that his heart wasn't pure, and it made Xin Yan feel disgusted. She looked at Xiaolong's hand and said faintly, I'm sorry, I was locked up by my family, and I haven't washed my hands for a few days. Xiaolong paused, and his face darkened. But it was only for a second, and he returned to normal. He was angry that Xin Yan didn't give him any face at all, saying that she was forced to do it in front of everyone. How could Xiaolong take that? But Xiaolong couldn't afford to fall out with Xin Yan right now. First of all, Xin Yan was a woman he liked, and there was no harm in pursuing a woman like that. Second of all, he couldn't fall out with the Xiao family for the sake of the family's benefit. It seems that Xin Yan doesn't want to marry into House Kong, does she? Dr. Kong was a little angry at Xin Yan's words. Xiaolong couldn't say it, but he could. Although the Kong family was not an aristocratic family yet, the marriage was mutually beneficial, and the Xiao family also understood it very well. Moreover, the old master of the Xiao family had passed away, and there were only 2 juniors left. Dr. Kong was qualified to take advantage of his seniority. Xiaoji was a little irritated as well. He didn't expect Xin Yan to be so disrespectful in a situation like this. He was about to scold her a little, but Xiao Bin shot him a look, and he shut his mouth. In the Xiao family, although Xiaoji was the eldest, Xiao Bin was very intelligent. Xiaoji now understood that the only way to protect the family was if the 2 of them worked together. So, he gave up on being the eldest and listened to Xiao Bin. Elder Kong, she's a girl. How can she agree to it so easily? Xiao Bin smiled. It's the young people's business, of course. We're just acting as a middleman, and the key lies with them. Let's get to know each other first, and only then can we plan our next step. Xiao Bin's words were smooth. It was different from what he had originally intended, but Dr. Kong could still accept it. Xin Yan was clearly against it, and the Xiao family must have done a lot of work for her. If Dr. Kong were to insist on something, it would only make things worse, and that wasn't what Dr. Kong wanted to see. The only thing he could do was to let the 2 get to know each other as Xiao Bin suggested. Now that the two know each other, it's better to get to know each other more. I heard that Xinyan's studying in Songshan. Let Xiaolong go play with her on the weekends when he's free. Dr. Kong nodded. Xinyan, don't say no when I go find you, Xiaolong said with a smile. I'm in 12th grade, and I'm very busy. I don't have time, Xinyan said faintly. Xinyan had the intention to say no, but her reason was flawless. Xiaolong wasn't happy about it, but he could only say, there should be time for a meal, right? I'll just treat you to a meal and get to know each other. That depends on the time. Xinyan frowned, but there was nothing she could do since Xiaolong had already said so. She felt a little depressed when she saw her father's earnest gaze. No matter what, she had to deal with it first. She was still young, and if she dragged it out, something might happen. Xinyan felt a little more at ease at the thought. Dr. Kang's expression softened a little when Xinyan stopped objecting. Guifeng has booked a table at the hotel. Let's go together. Tang Yin didn't know how her day passed. She stumbled home at night to see her mother and father discussing buying a storefront with a smile on her face. Yin, you're back? Mrs. Tang looked at Tang Yun happily, not noticing her daughter's strange mood. Your dad and I are looking into it. We want to get a bigger store, preferably one with 2 floors. Our house is big enough, and it won't cost much. 500,000 should be enough. Oh, Tang Yin replied faintly, unable to say the words that were at the tip of her tongue. She wanted to take back the 500,000 from her mother, but how could she do that now? Tang Yin went back to her room, depressed, and closed the door. She laid on her bed and started crying. After crying for a while, she fell asleep. Tang Yin would go back to her room to read every day after school, so Mrs. Tang didn't find it strange at all. She didn't know how long it had been, but Tang Yin was woken up by a commotion. She got up in a daze, wanting to wash her face before coming back to her room to read. She opened the door to see her brother, Wang Luwei, and his girlfriend, Dan, sitting on the sofa with a hesitant look on their faces. Yin, you're awake? I didn't dare wake you up because you were asleep, Mrs. Tang said happily. You're tired from school every day, so I didn't want to disturb you. Now that you're awake, I need your help with Wei's matter. Tang Yin paused. What's wrong with Wei? Sis, you have to help me. Wei looked at Tang Yin dejectedly, begging, you have to save Dan. What now? What did you do this time? Tang Yin was already in a bad mood, and hearing that Wei was in trouble made her even more unhappy. Wei could see that, and so could Mrs. Tang. She glared at Tang Yin. What? You're not going to care about your brother now that you're rich. Wei could see that, and so could Mrs. Tang. She glared at Tang Yin. What? You're not going to care about your brother now that you're rich. Chapter 481. How am I supposed to return it? Sister, you found a powerful brother-in-law. You must save me this time. Xiaowei said carefully, it's the same boss we talked about last time. He still won't let me and Xiaoding go. The boss from last time? Didn't you give them the 150,000 already? Tang Yun paused and looked at her brother in confusion. 150,000 yuan was given to him, but he said that 150,000 yuan was the situation 10 years ago. Now that the price of goods has increased so many times, the 150,000 yuan will also have to pay interest. Speaking up to this point, Xiaowei seemed very angry. He said that either you pay him back 500,000 yuan with interest, or you want Xiao Dan to continue working in the company, or you give him money, 500,000? Tang Yun's eyes widened. How can they be so greedy? Turning 15 into 50 all of a sudden? Does he have a contract? Why don't we go to court to sue him? Where's the contract? Little Wei smiled bitterly. If there was a contract, it wouldn't be like this. The only contract was the one we signed. Xiao Dan had to work for him. If Xiao Dan broke the contract, she would have to compensate him for all his losses. He didn't say how much the losses were, so he could talk nonsense. Besides, we can't afford to go to court. Uncle Tang's matter hasn't been resolved yet, right? Tang Yun sighed. Wei was right. Her family was a weak group. How could they fight against those rich bosses? At that time, not to mention whether or not they could win the lawsuit. Even if they did win, they would still be the ones who would suffer losses if they backstabbed Xiao Wei. But, tell me, what can I do? Tang Yin lowered her head. She understood what Wei was implying. He wanted her to ask Linny for money, but how was she supposed to ask Linny for money now? Yuner, although I happen to have the 500,000 Linny gave me, isn't that the money we used to buy a retail store? If we give it away, we won't be able to buy a store. Mrs. Tang interrupted. Look, can't you talk to Linny and ask him for another 500,000? What do you want? Do you think he's a money tree? Tang Yun panicked and stood up abruptly. What money tree? He's rich, and this amount of money is nothing to him. Mrs. Tang looked at her daughter and said with disappointment, Now that you have the capital to ask for money, you must ask for more. If you ask for more, he'll definitely agree. Mrs. Tang said, Yes, sister, I beg you. Only brother-in-law can help you with this matter. If you don't go, what about Xiaodan? You can't just watch as she walks into a tiger's den. Xiao Wei also hurriedly advised. You don't understand at all. You don't even know what happened between me and Lin Yi. Why do you always force me to ask for money? Why do you always force me? Tang Yin was so angry that she was on the verge of tears. She screamed at the top of her lungs, I already owe him so much money. How am I supposed to pay him back? How am I supposed to pay him back? I was the one who asked him for money, not you. What do you want me to do in the future? Mrs. Tang helplessly looked at her crazy daughter. Yuner, do you still not understand? Linny likes you. Your beauty is his capital. If you don't make good use of it, you'll regret it when he breaks up with you. Break up? That's right. We've already broken up. Tang Yin didn't want to talk about her scandal, but she was being forced into a corner. He doesn't want me anymore. Are you happy now? The money from this morning was his breakup fee. Ah. Mrs. Tang froze. Mr. Tang, Wei, and Dan froze as well. Yin, what did you say? Linny broke up with you? You're joking, right? Joking? What kind of joke is this? Do I look like I'm joking? Tang Yin said as she recalled today's sad events and the grievances she'd suffered. Her eyes reddened, and tears started to flow down her cheeks. Mrs. Tang didn't know what to do. She was a snobbish person, but she was still on Tang Yin's side. She quickly picked up her daughter. Good girl, don't cry. It's fine if they broke up. I've said it before, he's a good-for-nothing, a hedonistic young master. Tang Yin found it funny at her mother's words. Her tears turned into a smile. Mom, didn't you say he was a good person? Mrs. Tang felt a bit awkward. Did he take advantage of you? No. Tang Yin shook her head. I told him that I can't do it before he brings me to his parents. That's good, that's good. Tang Yin was overjoyed. Since he didn't take advantage of him, then forget it. We even got 700,000 for free. It's a big win. Mom, what are you saying? You have to return that money. Tang Yin panicked when she heard that her mother was going to take Lin Yi's money for herself. How can I owe him that much and not pay him back? What's wrong with that? He dumped you, not the other way around. Besides, he gave you a breakup fee, so it's only right that we get it. Mrs. Tang said disapprovingly. Wei, on the other hand, was dumbfounded. He didn't think that his sister and Linny had already broken up. He was hoping that his sister would borrow the money. But now, sister, what about me? Xiao Wei hung his head dejectedly, and Xiao Dan's face was also filled with despair. Wei, don't worry. I won't buy it anymore. I'll give you the money first. Mrs. Tang may be snobbish, but she wasn't a cold-blooded person. She was generous to her family. I know I'm in trouble, but I can't let you and Dan suffer. How about this? You give them the money first. Mom, you still want to touch that money? I told you I'd return it to Lin Yi. Tang Yin panicked. She told Xiao Xiao that she'd return the money to Lin Yi. How could she touch that money? The breakup fee is yours, of course. Do you want to see your brother die? Mrs. Tang glared at Tang Yin. It's good enough that he asked for some more money. You're giving it back to him? Tang Yin was speechless. She had to return the money, but she couldn't just ignore Wei's situation. What should she do? But if she took the money without any qualms, what would Linny think of her? He'd definitely look down on her, and Xiao Xiao would laugh at her for being vain and acting all high and mighty. For a moment, Tang Yun was in a dilemma. Why are you so dumb? He played you. Isn't it normal for him to give you money? Mrs. Tang humphed. Chapter 482. Chapter 482. Sending money to the door, you can have fun with it or dump it, Mrs. Tang said with a wave of her hand. All right, it's decided. We'll go with Wei to that big boss later. Tang Yun felt that it wasn't right to use the money, but there was nothing she could do about it. It was her family's fault for being so unlucky. Sis, don't be sad. That bastard has eyes but can't see. Don't worry, Wei, am a man too. I'll return the money to you, Wei said. He knew what his sister was worried about. I won't make it hard for you. Okay. Tang Yun nodded, comforted. At least Wei wasn't the type of person who only knew how to ask for money. It was enough for her. The bank card was opened under Tang Yun's name. Withdrawing 500,000 in one go, naturally, Tang Yun had to go there herself. They found a 24-hour bank, withdrew the money, and took a taxi with her mother, Wei, and Dan to the area where the big boss lived. Right here? It's so grand, Mrs. Tang said enviously as she looked at the luxurious facilities and beautiful houses. When will we be able to live in a house like this? Auntie, this is Lead Shore. It's one of the most luxurious residential areas in the city. Everyone who lives here is rich, and one house is worth tens of millions. Wei had been here a couple of times, so he was familiar with the market here. Tens of millions? That's expensive. Mrs. Tang was taken aback. She looked at her daughter with pity. I was hoping that your uncle and I would have a chance to live in a mansion like this now that you've found yourself a rich husband, but it seems like that's not possible anymore. Mom, what are you talking about? Tang Yun frowned. This was something that hurt her, and she didn't want to talk about it. I won't talk about it. I won't talk about it. Mrs. Tang thought to herself. Should she find a chance to talk to Lin Yi and see if there was a chance for them to get back together? But these rich young masters probably already had someone arranged for them to marry. Why else would they break up with her without any warning? There had to be a reason behind it. Mrs. Tang was a shrewd old woman, and naturally, she was a bit more scheming than Tang Yin. She thought even further than Tang Yin. Plus, he didn't know about Xiao Xiao, so he thought that there had to be a reason why Lin Yi dumped his daughter. Mrs. Tang thought that even if Lin Yi couldn't marry her because of his engagement, he could at least be a mistress, right? My requirements are not high. I just want my family to buy a mansion on the bank of the Lead River. If he couldn't do it, he had to ask Lin Yi for another sum of money. He couldn't let him get away with it. Even if he didn't do anything to his daughter, he had hurt her feelings. Tang Yun didn't know that her mother was thinking of something snobbish again. She was still very pure, and naturally, she wouldn't think that her mother would have such embarrassing thoughts. If she knew, she would be furious. However, Mrs. Tang couldn't be blamed for being so snobbish. The fickleness of the world had frightened her. After suffering for so many years, she didn't want her daughter to suffer anymore. So she even thought of becoming a mistress. She couldn't be blamed. It's here. Wei pointed at an independent mansion. Mr. Zhou lives here. Mom, don't say anything when we go in. We can't just give him money this time. We have to make an agreement. Tang Yin took a deep breath and calmed herself down. She returned to normal and stopped thinking about what happened during the day. Tang Yin hadn't interacted with society before, but in a high-class private school like Songshan's first, she had interacted quite a bit. She knew that everything needed a contract. Her father didn't get any compensation because the contract wasn't clear. So she could give that Mr. Zhou some money this time, but he had to write an agreement that he wouldn't pursue Dan's responsibility in the future. All right, I'll listen to you. Mrs. Tang nodded, knowing that her daughter knew a lot. Only then did little Wei ring the doorbell of the villa. Zhou Tiandi had been very depressed these past 2 days. Not only did he offend Lin Yi, but he also offended Sihua. Both of these were people who could kill him instantly. He didn't even have the slightest intention to fight back. His opponents were too strong. Lin Yi was a master above golden class, and Sihua didn't lack golden class masters around him. He could still do whatever he wanted in Songshan with Uncle Yan's support, but now that Uncle Yan was crippled by Lin Yi, he didn't dare go out and show off anymore. Fuck. Zhou Tiandi, used to be a big shot in Songshan, but now I'm this useless. Tiandi poured himself a glass of red wine and downed it in one gulp, depressed. But even though he was depressed, he was still glad. He might have offended Sihua, but it wasn't a deep grudge. He just didn't want to work with him, and Sihua wouldn't come after him for that. Lin Yi, on the other hand, had promised not to pursue the matter any further, so Tiandi felt a bit better. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to eat or sleep in peace. Fortunately, there would be a pretty girl coming to play with him in a while, and that soothed Tiandi's depressed heart a little. Tiandi adjusted his clothes when he heard the doorbell. He knew that it had to be Dan. He'd given Dan an ultimatum: bring the money tonight, or clean her up and send her here. The maid went to open the door, and Tiandi walked out of the study and headed downstairs to the living room. Tang Yun, Mrs. Tang, Dan, and Wei came to the living room and sat on the sofa awkwardly. Wei and Dan were a bit better, since they'd been here a few times before, but it was Tang Yun and Mrs. Tang's first time in a mansion like this, and they didn't know what to do. Dan, you're here, right? Are you going to give the money, or the person? Tiandi said as he walked down the stairs, but paused when he saw the 4 people on the sofa. But because the sofa's back was facing the stairs, Tiandi couldn't see who they were. Mr. Zhou, we brought the money. Wei stood up and turned to Tiandi. What? You brought the money? Tiandi paused, and anger rushed to his head. He never would have thought that Wei would come up with another 500,000. How was that possible? Wei and Dan were from the countryside, and even if they borrowed from the whole village, they wouldn't be able to get that much money, would they? Chapter 483. Scared to the bone, but Wei's words shattered Tiandi's fantasies. Tiandi's dreams had been shattered in an instant, and he was furious. Yeah, we brought 500,000. We hope that you'll let Dan go, Mr. Zhou. Wei nodded. He didn't want to, but he was willing to give up the money if it could save Dan. Where's the 500,000? Tiandi was pissed, but he couldn't go back on his words. He asked coldly, hoping to find something wrong and use it as an excuse to attack. It's with my sister, Wei said. Sis, can you take a look at him? Tang Yun found the voice familiar, and Wei called him Mr. Zhou. She suddenly realized that she knew this Mr. Zhou. He was Zhou Ruoming's father. Zhou Tiandi. Tang Yun's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't afraid of Zhou Tiandi when she was with Lin Yi, but now that Lin Yi had broken up with her, she'd lost Lin Yi's protection. Wouldn't she be at the mercy of the Zhou father and son? Tang Yun regretted coming here at the thought. She was afraid that Zhou Ruoming would do something outrageous again. Sis? Wei saw that Tang Yun wasn't moving and couldn't help but call out again. Tiandi looked at Tang Yun's silhouette. It was a pretty little figure, and he couldn't help but be moved. Dirty thoughts popped up in his mind as he smiled lewdly. Oh, your sister's here too? Tang Yun was even more afraid of Tiandi's disgusting voice, but Wei had already called out to her. She had no choice but to brace herself and stand up. She turned around and opened the bag in her hand, pretending to be calm. Mr. Zhou, I've brought the money. I hope you can keep your promise and let my brother and Dan go. What? Tiandi froze. He never would have thought that the sister Wei was talking about was Tang Yun. Damn it, why am I so lucky? The more I want to avoid Lin Yi, the more I provoke people related to him. Am I possessed by the god of misfortune? Otherwise, who else could be as unlucky as him? Tiandi thought that Tang Yun was mocking him at first. He was scared out of his wits as his face paled. I don't want it anymore. I don't want the money anymore. Tang Yun frowned as she saw the change in Tiandi's expression. Was he going back on his word? Little Wei was also shocked, and Little Dan's expression also changed slightly. Director Zhou, didn't you say that you would release Lil Dan for 500,000? Why are you going back on your word? Little Wei was a little anxious. Mr. Zhou, you won't go back on your word, right? Tang Yun was shocked as well, but in order to not show her fear, she forced herself to remain calm. She couldn't soften at a time like this, or Tiandi would only make things worse. I say, Miss Tang? No, Sis Tang. I'm calling you sis now. Please stop messing with me. I didn't do it on purpose. I really didn't do it on purpose. How would I know that Dan is your sister-in-law? I wouldn't have dared to do anything if I had known. Tiandi almost cried. He thought that Tang Yun was mocking him on purpose. After all, a lot of times, powerful people like to say the opposite when they wanted to show off. Tiandi had done it many times when he bullied the weak, so he subconsciously thought that Tang Yun was doing the same thing as well. Tiandi's reaction surprised everyone. Little Wei and Little Dan were dumbfounded, and so was Mrs. Tang. They didn't understand why Tiandi's attitude changed 180 degrees after seeing Tang Yun. Tang Yun frowned. After a short moment of confusion, she realized that Tiandi probably didn't know that she broke up with Linny yet. That was why he was being so respectful to her. She could use this chance to leave, but Tang Yun was afraid that Tiandi would come way after he found out that she broke up with Lin A. It seemed like he wasn't being sarcastic. He really didn't want the money anymore. Although they didn't know the reason for this change, it was still a pleasant surprise. With that thought, Tang Yun said, "Mr. Zhou, you should take the 500,000. This has to end, right?" Tiandi thought that Tang Yun was purposely messing with him, and he was angry, but more than that, he was afraid. He knew from his son, Zhou Ruoming, that Lin Yi treated Tang Yun like a precious baby. Last time his son tried to rape Tang Yun, Lin Yi beat him up quite badly. How would he dare mess with Tang Yun again? Plus, Tang Yun's presence here most likely had something to do with Lin Yi. There was a limit to a person's patience. Who wouldn't be happy if he kept messing with Lin Yi and the people around him, especially a master like Lin Yi? Masters usually didn't care about small fry, but if a small fry went too far, then a master wouldn't mind slapping a small fry to death. It was like a dog. You might ignore it if it barked at you, but if it came to bite you once, you might tolerate it. But if it kept on biting you and your family, then you might just kill it and eat its meat. Tiandi felt like he was that dog, and after messing with Linny so many times, it wasn't long before he was slapped to death. And so, Tiandi was completely terrified. He knelt on the ground with a thud, tears streaming down his face. "Tang sis, I'm begging you, please don't play with me anymore. I know I'm wrong now. Please go back and tell Bustling that I'm blind. I'll slap my own face, okay? Just treat me like a fart and let me go." With that, Tiandi raised his arm and started slapping himself across the face. Slap, slap. The sound of the slaps didn't stop as Tiandi pummeled himself with all his might, getting more and more pumped up as he hit himself. Tiandi's words made Tang Yun blush. What did he mean by treat it like a fart and let it go? She was a girl, wasn't she? How could he be so vulgar? She couldn't help but glare at Tiandi. Tiandi's bad look gave Tang Yun some courage. Since he didn't want the money, then she'd let him write a contract. With a contract, she wouldn't have to worry about him going back on his words in the future. With that in mind, Tang Yun decided to go with the flow and use her connections to intimidate others. Chapter 484. Chapter 484. Amazing Mrs. Tang. At the same time, Little Wei and Little Dan were deeply shocked. The two of them were afraid of Tiandi, but Tiandi was even more afraid of Lin Yi than they were of him. Tiandi was willing to throw away his pride just to get on Tang Yun's good side. It made Wei's blood boil. Wouldn't it be great if Lin Yi hadn't broken up with his sister and was his brother-in-law instead? He'd be able to take advantage of Lin Yi and show off. But why did he break up with his sister? What was so bad about his sister? She was pretty and had a good personality. She was one in a million. Was Lin Yi blind? But Wei knew that if Lin Yi was really that amazing, then he wouldn't lack women around him. His sister's advantage wouldn't be much of an advantage anymore. Mrs. Tang, on the other hand, was very emotional and regretful. If only Lin Yi hadn't broken up with Tang Yun. With a son-in-law as powerful as he was, who would dare mess with her family? Mr. Zhou was slapping himself in the face the moment he heard Lin Yi's name. He was too excited. My son-in-law said that if you cause trouble for my nephew again, he'll teach you a lesson," Mrs. Tang said with her hands on her waist. She didn't know why, but the words slipped out of her mouth. Tang Yun looked at her mother accusingly. What son-in-law? It was already out of the question, but she couldn't correct it right now. She couldn't let Tiandi know, could she? She had no choice but to let her mother say whatever she wanted. I wouldn't dare, Tiandi said quickly. Ah, it's Auntie. I apologize for my rudeness. I'll be strict with myself and never cause trouble again. What about the 150,000 I gave you? Mrs. Tang humphed. Tiandi calling her auntie at his age made Mrs. Tang feel a sense of accomplishment. Tiandi was probably even older than her, wasn't he? Since when had Mrs. Tang ever been treated this way? She was overjoyed. Tang Yun knew that things were about to go south at her mother's words. Wouldn't this make Tiandi suspicious? He wouldn't have given him that 150,000 if he'd known it was Zhou Tiandi, but he'd given him another 150,000 just now. Mom, Linny said that the 150,000 is what Wei owes him. We should just give it to him. Tang Yun said quickly. Tang Yun had no choice but to lie in order not to be exposed. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to smooth things over. Mrs. Tang, on the other hand, was a little reluctant. She could have used Lin Yi's name to get back the 150,000 yuan. Why did her daughter not want it? Yes, I will return the 150,000 immediately. Immediately. Tiandi didn't have time to think about that. Tang Yun was worrying too much, and with Tang Yun's words, Tiandi wouldn't be suspicious at all, because that was Lin Yi's personality. He didn't have the time to find fault with small matters. As long as it didn't touch his bottom line, it was usually fine. But although Tang Yun said that Lin Yi didn't want the 150,000 yuan, Mrs. Tang was the one who asked. Tiandi didn't dare refuse. What if Lin Yi's mother-in-law wasn't happy and said a few bad things about him at home? Lin Yi would tear him apart, wouldn't he? Tiandi thought that it would be such a waste if he lost his life over such a small matter. So whether Tang Yun wanted it or not, he'd just give the money to Mrs. Tang and shut her mouth. It'd be best if she could put in a few good words for him and make Lin Yi give up on causing trouble for him. With that thought, Tiandi scrambled up the stairs. Tang Yun glared at her mother, but Mrs. Tang didn't mind. If she could get the money, so what if she borrowed Lin Yi's name? Little Wei and Little Dan were also shocked. Just how strong was Lin Yi to be able to scare Tiandi like this? As far as they knew, Tiandi was a super powerful man. He had money, power, and power. His eldest son, Zhou Ruoguang, was the leader of the gangsters in the North District. With a status like that, he was one of the tyrants in Songshan, but Lin Yi wasn't even here yet. His sister was here, and she scared him to the point of pissing his pants. If Lin Yi was here, would he have to kneel and kowtow? But Wei and Dan didn't dare say anything. They didn't want to mess things up, so they could only talk about it at night. It wasn't long before Tiandi came downstairs. Perhaps it was because he was in a hurry, but he slipped and fell down the stairs like a slide. Tiandi didn't care about the pain on his butt at all as he handed a bag to Mrs. Tang. Auntie, this is for you. Didn't I say I don't want it? Tang Yun didn't insist after seeing Tiandi take the money. She didn't really stop him. She knew that there was no point in stopping him. The money was in her mother's hands, and she wouldn't be able to get it back. Mrs. Tang beamed as she took the bag. She sat down on the sofa and started counting the contents. Tang Yun was speechless. Tiandi was already like this. He wouldn't dare give less, but she was still counting money in front of him as if she'd never seen money before. Wasn't this embarrassing? Tang Yun stomped her feet in anger, but she couldn't say anything. But Tiandi saw Tang Yun's expression. He didn't think much of Mrs. Tang counting money. He knew Tang Yun's family background very well. They were a poor family in the slums, so it was normal for Mrs. Tang to be greedy. Tang Yun stomping her feet didn't seem like a big deal to Tiandi. Tang Yun was in a relationship with Lin Yi now, and she had plenty of money. She probably didn't care about the money. Why is there an extra 50,000? Mrs. Tang counted the money in the bag. She was surprised to find that there was an extra 50,000 in the bag. Auntie, this 150,000 has been with me for so long. Of course I have to pay interest. This 50,000 will be the interest, Tiandi said quickly. He was hoping that Lin Yi's mother-in-law would put in a good word for him, and Tiandi knew Mrs. Tang's weakness very well. She was greedy. The extra 50,000 was for Mrs. Tang's good graces. Tiandi believed that Mrs. Tang wouldn't blame him anymore. She'd even praise him. As expected, Mrs. Tang's smile grew wider after hearing Tiandi's words. Good, not bad. You're pretty good. Mrs. Tang happily put the money back into the bag and turned to Tang Yun. Let's go then? We won't disturb Mr. Zhou's rest anymore. Wait, Mr. Zhou, please write me an IOU. Make it clear that you won't cause trouble for my brother and Dan anymore. Tang Yun remembered this important thing. She needed an IOU. What if Tiandi went back on his word? Chapter 485. The grievances. It didn't matter what Tang Yun's motives were. Zhou Tiandi would try his best to satisfy her if she asked for it. He didn't have any other thoughts. He just thought that Tang Yun was very careful. If it was Lin Yi, he wouldn't be this polite. Lin Yi wouldn't ask him for anything. He'd beat him up until he couldn't write anything anymore. Not only did Zhou Tiandi write it down, stating that he would never cause trouble for Wei and Dan ever again, but he also returned the contract he signed with Dan to Dan. This meant that Dan would have nothing to do with him from now on. Tang Yun let out a sigh of relief after getting the contract. She didn't want to stay in Zhou Tiandi's house any longer. She nodded and turned to her mother. "Let's go then." "Wait." Tiandi called out to Tang Yun's family. Tang Yun's heart skipped a beat. Did Zhou Tiandi see something? Did he know that she was acting tough? "Mr. Zhou, are you going back on your word?" Tang Yun turned around, trying to sound calm. Mrs. Tang, Wei, and Dan, on the other hand, paled in fright. They didn't turn around, and Zhou Tiandi didn't see it either. "No, Sis Tang, you've misunderstood." Tiandi jumped and quickly explained. "What I mean is, I'll send a car to send you back. It's late, and you guys have money on you. It's not safe." It wasn't Tiandi's fault. He had no choice but to do so. Tang Yun's family had so much money on them, and with the 200,000 from before, they had 700,000 in total. It wasn't safe to go out at night. If something happened and they got robbed, and Linny thought he was the one who sent the robbers, they'd be screwed. So, in order to prove his innocence, Zhou Tiandi had to send a car to escort them home himself. He was relieved when they got home. "I see. That's fine." Mrs. Tang agreed. It wasn't safe to bring so much money this late at night. Tiandi quickly called the driver after Mrs. Tang agreed, telling him to drive the company's car back. He then put on his jacket and prepared to send the family home. "Mr. Zhou, you should rest. There's no need for you." Tang Yin didn't want Tiandi to follow her. It'd be bad if he noticed something. What if Linny sees you and gets angry again? Quack! Tiandi jumped in fright at Tang Yun's words. She was right. If Linny couldn't see him, he could let it go after a few days. But what if Linny saw him and beat him up? Tiandi said gratefully. "Thank you, Sister Tang. I was a little unwise. Since that's the case, I won't send you off. It's not that I'm lacking in etiquette, but I really don't dare to." Mrs. Tang, Wei, and Dan breathed a sigh of relief. But Mrs. Tang turned around and said haughtily, "There's no need for that. I'll talk to my son-in-law later. I won't scare you anymore." Sigh. "Thank you, Auntie." Tiandi was overjoyed. He was waiting for Mrs. Tang to say that. Tiandi's driver came quickly. He told the driver that he had to respect Tang Yin's family even more than he respected himself before letting the driver drive off. Tiandi's driver was very responsible. He'd rather walk on the dirt road and scratch the undercarriage of the car. He only left after sending the family home. Everyone let out a sigh of relief when they got home. The show was quite successful, and the happiest person was Mrs. Tang. Not only did she not have to pay, but she also got 200,000. It was a blessing from the heavens. "Mom, how could you say that? I don't have anything to do with Linny anymore, and you're still calling him your son-in-law? Aren't you trying to embarrass me?" Tang Yin felt a little embarrassed when she got home. She didn't want to use Lin Yi's name. He didn't want her anymore, and she was using his name. Wasn't that shameless? Tang Yun was too ashamed to show her face. "That's nothing." Mrs. Tang didn't think much of it. "That boss so doesn't know anyways. Right, daughter? Is there still a chance between you and Lin Yi? Why doesn't he want you anymore?" Tang Yun was a little embarrassed. She didn't want to talk about Lin Yi, especially when Wei and Dan were here. It was even harder to talk about Lin Yi. "Wei, Dan, it's getting late. You two should go home and stop contacting Boss Zhou." Mrs. Tang saw through Tang Yin's thoughts and turned away and Dan. Wei was curious as to why Lin Yi and Tang Yin broke up. He wanted them to get back together, so he wanted to stay and listen. But his sister seemed to have something she couldn't talk about. He couldn't stay any longer. He stood up and pulled Dan. "Auntie, we'll go back first. Be careful on the road. Give me a call when you get home." Mrs. Tang sent Wei and Dan off and went back into the house. She held her daughter's hand. "Yin, tell me, why did you guys break up? I saw that Lin Yi treated you pretty well, didn't he? I didn't see anything wrong this morning. How did he break up?" "Mom, he had a girlfriend before. His girlfriend transferred to our school, and she's sitting at the same table as him." Tang Yin found it hard to say it out loud, but her mother pressed on. She gritted her teeth and blushed. Mom, you said he had a girlfriend before. Why'd he try to mess with me then? Mother and daughter were connected. Tang Yin let go of her strong front in front of her mother and started crying in her mother's arms. Yin, don't cry. Mrs. Tang sighed. It wasn't like what she guessed. It wasn't that Linny didn't like her daughter anymore, but that the main character came and forced Linny to break up with her. Mom, why is he so bad? Why would he bother me when he has a girlfriend? I'm so embarrassed. How am I supposed to raise my head in the future? Tang Yin felt more and more wronged as she spoke. Ina, Mrs. Tang sighed. It's all Mom's fault. It's all because we're poor. If we were rich, Lin, he wouldn't have broken up with you. His girlfriend must be from a rich family, right? His family must have gotten her for him, right? Yeah. He drives a sports car to school. Tang Yin nodded. She wasn't lying. That's what I said. Otherwise, why would Lin Yi break up with you? Mrs. Tang said as she stroked her daughter's hair. Did his girlfriend come looking for you? Chapter 486. Xiao Xiao and daughter HM? Mrs. Tang's eyes lit up at her daughter's words. Ying, you're saying that Lin Yi's girlfriend doesn't mind you being a mistress? Tang Yun blinked, but understood what her mother was getting at. She frowned. Mom, you're not thinking of making me a mistress, are you? If that's the case, then don't even mention it. I wouldn't do something so embarrassing. Mrs. Tang didn't say anything else after seeing her daughter's determination. She patted her daughter's shoulder. All right, don't cry, Een. Who knows, maybe Linny will change his mind one day. Who cares about him changing his mind? I don't want to talk to him anymore. Tang Yun stomped her feet. I'm going to study. I was too stupid to trust him before. I won't do it again. With that, Tang Yun ran into her room and told her mother everything. She felt much better now, not as depressed and wronged as before. Mrs. Tang shook her head regretfully as she looked at her daughter's back. She sighed to herself. Een, you still don't know how hard life is. You'll know how painful it is when you're as old as I am. She thought back to her classmates, many of whom weren't as pretty as she was when they were young. But they were rich now. They took good care of themselves, and she, on the other hand, was the prettiest girl in school when she was young. It was rare to have a man that her daughter liked, and he liked her as well. It wouldn't be embarrassing to be a mistress. When he attended a class reunion, there was a divorced woman who became the mistress of a big boss and kept bragging about it to everyone. Not only did no one despise her, but they were also very envious of her. Before leaving, they did not forget to ride in her BMW to satisfy their cravings. Laugh at the poor, but not at the prostitutes. It wasn't a nice saying, but it indirectly reflected the helplessness of reality. Xiao Xiao took her blood numbly and was sent to do a CT scan and all sorts of tests. It was the same every time, and the results were always the same. Xiao Xiao yawned as she laid on the hospital bed, bored. Tianlong walked in, looking at his daughter with concern. Xiao Xiao, what do you want to eat tonight? Daddy's bringing you? I'll take a leave of absence these 2 days to accompany you. No need. You go do what you need to do. Xiao Xiao shook her head, her eyes empty as she looked at the cars outside. Are the results out yet? When can I go back? Xiao Xiao only asked if the results were out and when she could go back. It was obvious that she didn't have any hope for a cure. She just wanted to go back after the checkup. Otherwise, if he could be treated, he would definitely stay in the hospital. Not yet, but Dr. Zhang is an expert in hereditary diseases. He should have a way. Tianlong comforted. You don't have to comfort me. Even the legendary Dr. Lin Dongfang couldn't do anything about my mother's illness. How could anyone else? Xiao Xiao curled her lips. She'd basically lost all hope. She just wanted to do something spontaneous in the last stages of her life. That way, she wouldn't have any regrets. Miracle Dr. Lin also said that it wasn't that he couldn't save her, but he lacked some conditions. Tianlong said helplessly. Miracle Dr. Lin said that if he had 5 years, he might be able to find a solution. But your mother can't wait 5 years. Isn't that just an excuse for being useless? Xiao Xiao humphed. Who knows if he can cure her? Maybe he's afraid of ruining his own reputation? No. Miracle Dr. Lin has been researching the special ingredients in your mother's blood. But after that last meeting, he went into seclusion. Tianlong said helplessly. He can't cure her, so he went into seclusion. Xiao Xiao didn't think much of it. All those miracle doctors are like that, and that bullshit Dr. Kong. What else can he do other than make medicine? Everyone calls him a miracle doctor. What a joke. You were young back then, so you didn't understand Miracle Dr. Lin. He's a stubborn person. For your mother, he risked his life and went to Miaojiang to research poison. Tianlong didn't have the heart to scold his daughter, but he still lectured her. You can't disrespect him. Fine, fine. Xiao Xiao waved her hand. If he's so stubborn, why did he go into seclusion? Your mother's illness isn't that easy to research, is it? Tianlong smiled bitterly. I've been trying to contact him recently, but I haven't been able to. Captain Yang, who brought me on a mission back then, was close to Miracle Dr. Lin, but he went into seclusion as well. So you know it's not easy to research, then why did you bring me here? Xiao Xiao frowned. The results are still a few days away. I'll take you around Yinjing these 2 days. It'll be a good time to relax. Tianlong didn't answer his daughter's question directly. He knew that Dr. Zheng wouldn't be able to do anything with the results, but having hope was better than having no hope at all. Oh, Xiao Xiao replied faintly. She didn't say that she was going, but she didn't say that she wasn't interested either. Someone gave Dad an invitation to an auction. Do you want to go? Tianlong suddenly remembered that House Yu's auction was in a few days, and he received an invitation as well. The organization that Feng Tianlong belonged to was called the Secret Investigation Bureau. It was a very special secret agent organization that had a close relationship with the host of the auction, House Yu. House Yu would always send a lot of tickets to the Secret Investigation Bureau, but most of them didn't have the time to attend the auction. The invitation was just a courtesy. Auction? Let's go then. Xiao Xiao had never been to an auction before, but now that her father mentioned it, she wanted to go. It'd be such a waste if she didn't get to go to an auction before she died. But if there's anything you like, I don't have the money to buy it. Tianlong smiled regretfully. Dad's salary is high, but I can't afford to auction items that are worth millions. Haha. Xiao Xiao finally smiled. She wanted this feeling of novelty, the feeling of her father bringing her to play. It didn't matter if she bought it or not. Xiao Xiao had heard her father say that he was going to walk around with her a lot of times, and it was always because he had a mission, so he'd skipped a few times. But this time, her father said that he was going to an auction, and he'd even brought out an invitation. No skipping. Tianlong was happy to see the smile on Xiao Xiao's face. I won't. There's 3 rounds. I can at least watch one with you. Chapter 487. The auction begins. The auction was split into 3 days, with different items being auctioned each day. Of course, it didn't mean that one invitation could participate in all 3 auctions. Only those big families and a very small number of celebrities had the golden invitation to participate in all 3 auctions. The ordinary red invitation indicated the number of auctions one could participate in, and it was only valid on the day of the auction. Red invitations were for the common rich and famous people. They could participate in the auction as well, but they weren't as valuable as the golden ones. Fatty Lie's invitation was a red one, but he'd gotten all 3 days' worth of invitations. Xuemin, on the other hand, was a golden one. It was enough to show that Xuemin had the right to sit on the same level as the big houses. The items auctioned got more and more valuable as the days went by. The items on the first day were rare items, but the base price ranged from a few 100,000 to 2 million, never exceeding 2 million. The second day was 2 million to 5 million, and the third day was for items that were worth more than 5 million. Normal rich people could only participate in the first day of the auction, and the second and third days were just for the show. Many people didn't bother getting invitations for the second and third days, and even if they did, they'd just give them to their friends who liked to watch the show. There were different types of invitations, but the auction didn't have a fixed seating area. People were usually seated randomly, and close family friends would sit closer to each other. There were a lot of seats in the auction house, and not even a third of the seats could be filled. There was no need to worry about not being able to find a seat. Lin Yi, Xuemin, and Fatty Lai found a place with fewer people and sat down. It didn't take long for more and more people to arrive at the auction house. All the houses had sent their representatives, but normally, The heads of the houses wouldn't show up. The lights dimmed, and a few spotlights lit up the auction stage. A man in his 30s walked out from behind the curtain, and the auction house quieted down. "Welcome, guests, to the annual auction hosted by Houseu." The man bowed politely, and the crowd burst into thunderous applause. "Houseu." Linny paused for a moment, and a trace of excitement flashed across his calm face before returning to normal. "Boss, this Houseu is the biggest and most mysterious noble house. They rose up in the last 10 years, but they've become the leader of all the noble houses." Fatty Lai whispered to Lin Yi. "It's best not to piss off Houseu, but with your status, heh, even Houseu would try to curry favor with you, right?" "Huh? Is that so?" Linny smiled faintly. "Who's that?" "His name is Yu Haitian. He's not a core member of Houseu. He's just a side relative. But he's already someone that outsiders want to curry favor with. He's able to manage the auction on his own," Fatty Lai said. Linny took a deep breath and nodded silently, smiling. "I don't think we'll have any more interactions." "Yeah, Houseu is very mysterious. I don't know what they do, but they're involved in a lot of businesses. It's just that the people they send aren't the core members of Houseu." Fatty Lai shook his head with a smile. "Let's continue watching the auction. Our pill of life extension and toxin cleansing is being auctioned today. These people are blind. They can't recognize the good stuff." Fatty Lai wasn't happy when he thought about the starting price of the pill of life extension and toxin cleansing. Why was such a good thing only worth $1 million? Wasn't this a scam? "Huh. It's nothing." Linny shook his head. "It's already beyond my expectations that it's priced at $1 million. No one knows about it, after all. We'll have to try it to know its effects." "That's true." Fatty Lai didn't feel conflicted anymore after hearing Lin Yi's words. "Right, boss? If there's anything you like, just tell me. I'll get it for you." "Okay." Linny didn't hold back. There was always a chance that he'd find something he liked in this auction. There was at least one item that Linny was determined to get. Linny had already seen the catalog for today's auction. The third item was a torn sheepskin scroll, a tattered map. Of course, to a normal person, this was probably just an old map. Even if it was an antique, it wouldn't be worth much. It was just a novelty. Most importantly, this was only a small part of the map. It wasn't a complete map, so it was basically a piece of trash. Whether it was a collector's item or actual value, it wasn't worth much. If Lin Yi didn't have that piece of the map from the shark's stomach, Lin Yi wouldn't even pay attention to trash like this. But from the thumbnail of the catalog, this map was exactly the same as the one he'd gotten from the shark's stomach in terms of material and craftsmanship. Naturally, Lin Yi's interest was piqued. Will there be a lot of people fighting for this? Lin Yi didn't know much about auctions. He didn't know what would be popular, so he pointed at the map and asked Fatty Lai. Fatty Lai looked at the item Lin Yi was pointing at, and his eyes widened. "No way, boss, you're interested in this? What? Is there a problem?" Lin Yi frowned. He didn't know what Fatty Lai's expression meant. Fatty Lai realized that his expression was a little exaggerated. So he explained awkwardly, "Boss, in this auction, the earlier the item is, the less valuable it is, and the less people will buy it. Of course, there's always the possibility of a dark horse appearing. But to be honest, I really don't see any use for this thing." "Huh, then help me bid for it." Lin Yi let out a breath of relief. It wouldn't be easy if there were a lot of people fighting for it. On the catalog, the base price of the map was 100,000. It seemed like Fatty Lai was right. It wasn't something that was popular. The first auction item was a complete piece of jade that had not been carved. This kind of thing, if it was brought to an ordinary auction, would be a treasure of the finale. However, there were very few people bidding for it here. Obviously, those real aristocratic families and rich people did not care about this at all. The base price was 1 million, and in the end, it was won by a man with a red invitation card for 2 million. It didn't attract much attention. Chapter 488. The second map fragment appears. This kind of thing would have caused quite a stir in a normal auction, but the noble house heirs obviously weren't interested in it here. In the end, it was won by a normal merchant with a red invitation card, and the price wasn't more than 150,000 renminbi. The third item was the map fragment that Lin Yi had his eyes on. The starting price was 100,000 renminbi, and when the auctioneer showed it, there was a brief silence in the hall. Because the description on the map was very brief, and the lines on the map were not clear, no one knew what this thing was used for. Even if it was an antique, there was no corresponding appraisal report, and it was not even clear when it was made. If it wasn't an antique, there was no explanation of what it was used for. It was similar to the hand-drawn maps used by bandits in the old days, and it was just a fragment. This kind of thing didn't have any real value at all. It was fine to sell it in the antique market to people who didn't know anything about it, but in an auction, it seemed a little out of place. However, there were always some strange things that appeared in auctions, and while many of them were left unsold, there were always a few of them every year. In fact, the auctioneer didn't know what this map fragment was, so there was no introduction. Therefore, there was no introduction at all. According to the introduction on the booklet, this was a strange sheepskin map. It might be a treasure map of a huge treasure. Of course, he also said that it was just a possibility. There were many possibilities, like picking up 1,000,000 RMB on the streets. No one would believe something as ridiculous as that. The noble house heirs and rich merchants who came to the auction weren't idiots. They were here for things that were useful to them, and naturally, they wouldn't participate in anything they didn't want. An auction wasn't a market, after all. Things they didn't want had to be bought in the end, and they couldn't go back on their word. As a result, no one made a bid for a useless map fragment like this. It wasn't like the auctioneer hadn't encountered a situation like this before. There were plenty of items that were left unsold, and this one wouldn't make much of a difference. He cleared his throat. Auction item number 3, a sheepskin map. Anyone up for bidding? 110,000. Fatty Lai raised the sign in his hand. This thing might really be a treasure. I'll buy it and study it. Fatty Lai's words attracted a lot of confused and disdainful gazes from the crowd. Finding the treasure with a tattered map like this? That was ridiculous. Fatty Lai looked like a rich nouveau riche, and those who knew him were confused. Fatty Lai was a smart guy, so why would he buy such a tattered map? Could it be that he wanted to show off? Those who didn't know him all thought that Fatty Lai was an idiot with nowhere to spend his money. 110,000. Mr. No. 183 offers 110,000. Is there anyone with a higher price? The auctioneer was slightly taken aback. However, it was naturally good that there were people participating. Although it was only 110,000, 20% of the profits would go to the auction house. Even if a mosquito was small, it was still meat. 110,000 going once. 110,000 going twice. The auctioneer looked at the people present, hoping that someone would raise the price, but unfortunately, no one did. These rich kids weren't idiots. They wouldn't bid for something useless, and they might even become enemies with the other bidders. Those who could participate in this auction were people who put profit first. No one was willing to do something that would harm others without benefiting themselves. If they were useless, then they might as well not participate and leave it to someone who was useful. But if they were useful, then they'd definitely fight until their necks were red. Messing around like this was rare, unless the two people had a grudge against each other. In a corner of the auction house, a man's face tensed up when he heard that someone was bidding. He said into the earpiece, "Second uncle, do you need me to raise the price?" The other party seems to be very cautious. I don't know if he wants it or not. A middle-aged man's voice came from the earpiece. Let's see if we can add 10 or 20,000 symbolically. Okay, the man replied. When the auctioneer said 110,000 going thrice, he raised the sign in his hand and said, 120,000. Oh, looks like it's something good. I'll have to raise the price then. Fatty Lai looked at the man with a surprised expression. He didn't wait for the auctioneer to speak and stood up. 125,000. Everyone at the scene froze. They were wondering if the scroll was something good when they saw someone bidding for it. But after hearing Fatty Lai's words, they understood. Fatty Lai's way of bidding was enough to tell that he wasn't determined to get it. Otherwise, why would he bid like this? It was like he was being shameless. Although the minimum price for an item with a starting price of 100,000 was 5,000, it was rare for people to do that. They usually increased the price by 10,000 or 10,000. Fatty Lai's increase could only mean that he didn't care about this item. If someone tried to compete with him, he'd just raise the price symbolically. If the other party raised the price too high, he'd just give up. So the crowd wasn't interested in participating. Participating now was equivalent to starting a feud. It was all up to these two. Second uncle, what does he mean by this? The man asked hesitantly. I don't know. Add another 5,000 and we'll see. If he raises the price again, just give up, the middle-aged man said. 130,000. The man raised the sign in his hand. 135,000. Fatty Lie shook his butt and raised the sign. Give up, the middle-aged man said. Get someone to investigate his background. Okay, the man said and didn't raise the sign again. 135,000 going once. 135,000 going twice. Sold. The auctioneer slammed the hammer down. The people who wanted to watch the show were disappointed. The person bidding against Fatty Lie was obviously just playing around. He didn't have any intention of getting it, and Fatty Lie probably had the same intention. As a result, no one thought that the map fragment would be anything good. Fatty Lie didn't look happy at all after the deal was done, and they were even more certain that he was only bidding for it for fun. He wasn't going to get it for real. Congratulations to Mr. Number 183 for winning this sheepskin scroll at the price of 135,000. Later, a staff member will contact you to discuss the delivery. After the auctioneer finished speaking, he began to introduce the next auction item. Chapter 489. Directly adding 100 million. The pill of life extension and toxin cleansing was arranged to be the 10th item to be auctioned. The auctioneer was the same as the sheepskin scroll before, not having much information about it. He didn't know what this item was, and nothing like it had ever appeared in an auction before. The auctioneer had no choice but to follow the instructions on the booklet. But he added a line during the introduction, something that Fatty Lie had specifically requested. As long as the seller's request wasn't too troublesome, the auctioneer would usually fulfill it. The next item is 3 pill of life extension and toxin cleansing provided by Miracle Dr. Guan's medical company. The starting price for each is 1 million, and the 3 will be auctioned off in 3 separate rounds. The auctioneer paused at this point because the auction house was in an uproar. Very few of them had heard of the pill of life extension and toxin cleansing, and this was the first time they'd heard of Miracle Dr. Guan's medical company. Just what kind of company was this? Just what kind of pill was the pill of life extension and toxin cleansing? Everyone present was familiar with health supplements and cherished their lives. So, if there was really such a good thing as prolonging one's life, it was impossible for them not to know about it. However, they really didn't know about this thing that appeared in the auction. Besides, wasn't 1 million a little too high? And it was only for one? Would anyone buy it? Everyone here didn't lack money, but no one was willing to waste their money, especially something that came out of nowhere like this. Who would even try it? The awkward silence that followed the uproar was within the auctioneer's expectations. Something like this happened at the auction every year, so the auctioneer wasn't surprised. He continued, this pill of life extension and toxin cleansing can expel impurities from the body. As we all know, when humans eat grains, some toxins will accumulate in their bodies. Although some of it has been expelled, some of it remains in the body. The longer it is, the more toxins accumulate. The pill of life extension and toxin cleansing can cleanse the marrow and bones, expelling the toxins from the body and achieving the goal of extending one's lifespan. The auctioneer didn't quite believe the description of the pill himself. It sounded like the strength pills of the martial arts world, and if this pill really had such an effect, then 1 million wouldn't be expensive at all. But was there such a thing? The first pill of life extension and toxin cleansing. The starting price is 1 million. Please bid. The auctioneer had already made preparations for the item to be left unsold. As long as no one bid for the first item, no one would bid for the second or third item. The auction would then be dismissed and the next item would be auctioned off. Because the auction of an antique vase took up some time, and the bidding was fierce, it was impossible for the auction to end within the estimated time. The auctioneer wanted to save as much time as possible. Others might not understand the effects of the pill of life extension and toxin cleansing, but there were people here who did. Lu Tianyi understood, and so did Dr. Kong. However, Dr. Kong didn't dare confirm whether this pill of life extension and toxin cleansing was the same as the one Kong Xiaobo had given him. Or was it a scam? Heh, they even made a miracle Dr. Guan. Isn't that obviously imitating you, Elder Kong? Xiao Ji, who was sitting not too far from Dr. Kong, said mockingly. I think this is a scam. He and Xiao Bin had just received the invitation today, but their father's invitation had always been golden this year. This year's invitation was red, and although they'd received 3 days' worth of invitations, it was clear that the Xiao family wasn't as important as it used to be. There was nothing they could do about it. Xiao Ji and Xiao Bin were furious, but getting an invitation was already good enough. What more could they ask for? The more it was like this, the more Xiao Ji and Xiao Bin felt that they had to ally with House Kong in order to protect their position as a noble house. Dr. Kong frowned, as if he'd thought of something, but he wasn't sure. Miracle Dr. Guan. This miracle Dr. Guan. Could it be Guan Shuamin? He recalled that the person beside Kong Xiaobo seemed to have a good relationship with Guan Shuamin. Could it be that the true owner of the pill of life extension and toxin cleansing was Guan Shuamin? Just as Dr. Kong was hesitating, someone stood up and called out a price. 100 million. Fatty Lai raised the card in his hand. The crowd was in an uproar, including the auctioneer. They all stared at Fatty Lai, dumbfounded. He'd been the auctioneer for House Yu for 10 years, but he'd never come across a situation like this. How could someone raise the price like this? An item with a starting price of 1 million was raised to 100 million in the first auction? How was that possible? Mr. 183, please repeat your bid. I didn't hear you clearly. It was embarrassing for the auctioneer to not hear the bidder clearly, but he didn't care anymore. The situation was too absurd, and he couldn't believe that Fatty Lai would bid 100 million. He must have heard wrong. The auctioneer was confused, but Yu Haitian, who'd been sitting below the stage, frowned slightly. House Yu was the host, but they were also part of the auction. Yu Haitian was sitting with a middle-aged man. If one looked closely, they'd see that the middle-aged man was wearing an earpiece. The auctioneer didn't know, but Yu Haitian knew very well that the pill of life extension and toxin cleansing was provided by Fatty Lai. Was he buying the pill himself? Or was he trying to raise the price? In the auction, there were indeed some people who wanted to raise the price of their items and participate in false bidding. The host of the auction knew this very well, and so in order to prevent this from happening, the host of the auction would take a commission, and House Yu's commission was as high as 20%. This way, even if someone wanted to raise the price, they'd have to take a huge risk. If they succeeded, then everyone would be happy. The host of the auction would take a lot of commission, and the seller would get the price they wanted. But if they failed, the seller would have to spend money to buy their item. In other words, the host of the auction would take a 20% commission. Of course, they could choose not to buy the item after the deal, but they'd have to pay the host of the auction a 20% commission. So no matter what, this 20% commission was a loss, and normal people wouldn't raise the price so easily. Chapter 490. An astronomical bid. Lu Tianyi gritted his teeth in anger. Fatty Lai was twisting his, but as he raised his paddle, and Lu Tianyi was furious. Other people didn't know what the pill of life extension and toxin cleansing was, but Lu Tianyi did. How could something Lin Yi made be anything bad? Just look at Fatty Lai's father, and you'd know if this thing was good or not. He didn't expect Fatty Lai to raise the price to 100 million right off the bat. Did he know how to buy things? Even if he had the money, he wouldn't spend it like that, would he? House Lu might be rich, but they couldn't just throw away 100 million like that. But as angry as he was, he knew the true value of the pill of life extension and toxin cleansing. Even 100 million was an understatement. And so, Lu Tianyi raised his paddle without hesitation. 110 million. Wah! The crowd was in an uproar. It was one thing for Fatty Lai to go crazy earlier, but Lu Tianyi was the first-in-line heir to the House Lu. How could he possibly follow Fatty Lai's lead? He'd even raised the price to 110 million. Could this pill of life extension and toxin cleansing really be something good? The auctioneer sucked in a breath of cold air. Holy H*T. This kind of bidding was a once-in-a-thousand-year wait. Yu Haitian's brows furrowed even tighter. If Fatty Lai was driving up the price, then why was Lu Tianyi joining in the fun? As far as Yu Haitian was concerned, this pill of life extension and toxin cleansing might actually be something good. Had he misjudged it when he evaluated it? 150 million. Fatty Lai raised his paddle again. Lu Tiany's lungs were about to explode. What was the meaning of this, Fatty Lai? Were you trying to fight with me? Don't think that I don't have money just because you're rich. Lu Tiany raised his paddle again, calling out a price that caused the crowd to go wild. 200 million. Originally, everyone held a wait-and-see attitude. They wanted to see if others would make a move before deciding whether they would make a move or not. Many of the people present knew Lu Tiany, and if Lu Tiany had his eyes on something, how could it not be something good? But now, they really couldn't make a move. Firstly, the price had been raised to 200 million, which was really too high. Secondly, they really didn't want to become enemies with Lu Tiany. From Lu Tiany's way of bidding, it could be seen that he was determined to get this pill of life extension and toxin cleansing. Otherwise, he wouldn't have increased the price like this. Therefore, even if there were some people who were tempted, it would not be good to bid now. Fortunately, there were a total of 3, and there were still 2 left. They all began to rub their fists. Because the way Lu Tiany was chasing after the pill of life extension and toxin cleansing reminded them of something. It wasn't a secret that Lu Tiany's father had gone to see Guan Xuemin a while ago. So many people present knew about it. Connecting the dots to the Miracle Dr. Guan Medical Company that the auctioneer mentioned, they immediately thought of Guan Xuemin. Could it be that Lu Tiany's father's condition had improved because of the pill of life extension and toxin cleansing? Those who knew Fatty Lai at the same time had an even greater realization. Fatty Lai's father had contracted uremia and was about to meet the king of hell when he suddenly got discharged from the hospital. Not only was his face glowing, but he was also eating well. He was even healthier than an old man his age. Even if his uremia wasn't completely cured, he was almost fully recovered. This miraculous situation made everyone present understand. Fatty Lai and Lu Tiany weren't idiots. They both knew how good this pill of life extension and toxin cleansing was. Why else would they dare to increase the price so much? 250 million. Fatty Lai's eyes were red. This was a rare treasure, and even Linny said it was rare. It had to be very precious. Fatty Lai was too embarrassed to ask Lin Yi for it, so he could only bid for it himself. 280 million. Lu Tiany gritted his teeth and called out the highest price he could. The crowd was in an uproar again. If Lu Tiany didn't know about the effects of the pill of life extension and toxin cleansing, he wouldn't have called out this price. There was only one answer. The auctioneer's introduction was true. This pill really had the effects of prolonging life and detoxifying. Fatty Lai was about to call out another price when Lin Yi pulled him back, shaking his head. Stop, it's a little expensive. All right. Fatty Lai didn't want to give up, but he didn't dare disobey Lin Yi. Lin Yi was his boss. Losing the pill of life extension and toxin cleansing was painful, but offending Lin Yi would be worse than death. Your dad drank the medicine I made for you. He doesn't need this anymore, Lin Yi said faintly to Fatty Lai. You don't have to fight for it. Thank you so much, boss. Fatty Lai was overjoyed. He'd wanted to prepare an emergency pill for his father, but Lin Yi said he could cure it. Fatty Lai, on the other hand, wanted one for himself. After all, this was an immortal pill. Thus, he said, Boss, I also want one for myself. Oh, I'll give you one when we get back, Lin Yi said nonchalantly. Fatty Lai burst into tears at Lin Yi's words. People who didn't know better would think that he was crying because he didn't have the money to bid for the pill of life extension and toxin cleansing. 280 million going once, 280 million going twice, 280 million going thrice. Sold. The auctioneer was extremely excited. This price could be said to be the most expensive item in the entire auction. Even the items on the third day of the auction might not be sold at such a price. This pill of life extension and toxin cleansing had the right to be auctioned in the third round. But since it was already in the first round, there was no changing it. They could only continue. Lu Tiany was overjoyed when he saw Fatty Lai stop bidding and start sobbing. This Fatty Lai must be out of money. He heard that House Lai's boss was trying to split from him, and it seemed like House Lai's money had all been taken by Lai Changtian. Next, the second pill of life extension and toxin cleansing, with a starting price of 100 million. The auctioneer said slowly, every increment must be at least 10 million. The auctioneer could increase the price according to the market and the response. With the previous example, the auctioneer wouldn't start with a starting price of 1 million again. That would be a joke. Although this price shocked the guests present, they also knew that this thing was indeed worth the price, so they didn't have any objections. Dad, what's that? How can it be sold for such a high price? Xiao Xiao looked at her father, confused. Chapter 491. House Yu makes a move. Tianlong, on the other hand, had a frown on his face. His heart was in turmoil, unable to calm down. Was there such a miraculous pill in this world? Would it work on his daughter's illness? If it really was as the auctioneer said, that it could cleanse a person's bones and marrow, could it be used on his daughter as well? Xiao Xiao's illness was caused by a defect in her blood. Miracle Dr. Lin had said it before, and with the development of science and technology, some genetic experts had said it as well. They'd all tried other methods to make up for Xiao Xiao's blood defect, but there hadn't been any progress. If this pill of life extension and toxin cleansing was effective, Tianlong would have gotten one for Xiao Xiao no matter what, but the price was too high for him to even think about it. He belonged to the most secretive department, and his annual salary was frighteningly high in the eyes of normal people, but he'd probably have to live his entire life without eating or drinking to buy a pill of life extension and toxin cleansing. Dad, what's wrong? Xiao Xiao asked curiously, seeing the conflicted look on her father's face. Xiao Xiao, I'm thinking, does this pill of life extension and toxin cleansing work on you? Tianlong said after some hesitation. But I can't afford it, huh? Xiao Xiao started laughing. This thing sounds like a strength pill. How could it be real? Dad, don't believe it. It's a scam. But the two people in the auction aren't idiots, Tianlong said, shaking his head. Feng Tianlong shook his head. One of them is Lai Changyi, the youngest son of the chairman of the biggest electronics industry in the north. He's rich, but he's not a prodigal. He's good at business. But why does he look like a crybaby? He can't get the pill, so he's just standing there crying? Xiao Xiao clicked her tongue. This fatty wasn't simple, but why was he crying? That's just how he is, but he doesn't cry all the time. He only cries for certain things. Tianlong said. The other person's even more powerful. He's the first heir to Yinjing's house Lu Tianyi. He can't be an idiot. What's wrong with that? Rich people will buy weird stuff if they see it. Xiao Xiao didn't believe that the pill was that powerful. Let's wait and see. Tianlong had already made up his mind to pay a visit to Lu Tianyi. If this pill of life extension and toxin cleansing was really effective, he had to get one for his daughter no matter what. The bidding for the second pill of life extension and toxin cleansing had already begun. Because the base price had been raised to 100 million, most of the people who wanted to participate in the bidding decided to wait and see. 150 million. Fatty Lai jumped up again, raising the card in his hand. The crowd wasn't surprised at all. Fatty Lai had already bid 250 million, so it was reasonable for him to bid 150 million now. It seemed like he was determined to get it. A lot of people saw Fatty Lai and Lu Tianyi fighting over the pill, and they were certain that the pill was something good and effective. But they didn't have the guts to throw out a few 100 million yuan for it. What if the effect was not obvious? What if it could only extend one's lifespan for a short period of time? That wouldn't be worth it. With 200 million yuan, they could do a lot more things. There was no need to buy this pill of life extension and toxin cleansing. 200 million. Tianyi didn't expect Tianyi to raise his paddle again and bid. Fatty Lai was starting to panic. Lu Tianyi, are you trying to go against me on purpose? What's the meaning of this? Isn't one enough for you? You want to fight with me? Aren't you a little too much? It's a fair competition, and the highest bidder wins. It's only right and proper. Lu Tianyi glanced at Fatty Lai. He knew that he was going a little overboard, but he couldn't back down now. If he could get it for 200 million, then so be it. If it was more than that, Lu Tianyi would give up. After all, money didn't grow on trees. Lu Tianyi was already very satisfied with just one pill of life extension and toxin cleansing. 250 million. Fatty Lai raised his card again, but this time he smiled at Lin Yi, who was sitting on the chair. Lin Yi immediately understood that Fatty Lai had jumped out to mess things up. His goal was to get the pill of life extension and toxin cleansing at a higher price. He didn't stop him and let him bid. Raise the sign and buy it. The middle-aged man beside Yuhaitian suddenly spoke and ordered Yuhaitian. Yuhaitian was slightly taken aback. He then nodded and said, "Yes, second uncle, 280 million. Haitian raised the bidding card in his hand. Houseu was the organizer of the auction, but they had the right to participate in the bidding as well. It was just that there were too few items that caught Houseu's eye. Everyone present was surprised at Haitian's sudden participation. Houseu had never raised a card in the past few years, because everyone knew that once Houseu raised their card, no one would dare compete with them. It wasn't just because they were afraid of Houseu's wealth, but also because they didn't want to be enemies with Houseu. Whatever Houseu wanted, they would get it no matter how much money they had. So as long as Houseu raised their card, everyone else would give up. Houseu understood this as well, and so they wouldn't raise their card easily. Doing so would ruin the reputation of their auction. They would only make an exception if there was something they absolutely had to get. Just like now, Houseu was actually bidding for a pill of life extension and toxin cleansing. This meant that Houseu was determined to get the pill this time, and the pill was confirmed as well. However, Houseu wouldn't do something that would be criticized by others. Haitian's bid was the same price as the previous pill of life extension and toxin cleansing, so it wasn't considered bullying the weak. It was a very fair deal for the seller. After Houseu's bid, no one else bid, and so Haitian successfully won the second pill of life extension and toxin cleansing. The third pill of life extension and toxin cleansing appeared, and it was also the last one. Many people were rubbing their palms together, but they really couldn't bear to spend 200 million on a pill. They weren't Houseu, nor were they Houselou, nor were they the nouveau riche fatty lie. They had other businesses that needed money, and this 280 million was a little too much. Chapter 492. The final auction. It looks like the pill of life extension and toxin cleansing is very popular. Now, let's start the auction for the last pill. Guests who are determined to get it, don't hold back. Remember, this is the last one. The last one. The auctioneer excitedly took out the last pill of life extension and toxin cleansing. He also hoped that this final pill of life extension and toxin cleansing could create a miracle and break through the previous two prices. The auction began, and the first to jump out was still Fatty Lie. Fatty Lie was still wiggling his fat, but as he raised his bidding card, 200 million. Wah! The people in the hall didn't expect Fatty Lie to bid 200 million this time, but they understood after some thought. Fatty Lie had failed twice before, and this was his last chance. If he didn't seize this chance, there wouldn't be another one in the future. The one who couldn't understand Fatty Lie's bidding was Yuhaitian. He'd gotten the pill of life extension and toxin cleansing, but the more he thought about it, the more shocked he became. This pill was a good item. "Uncle, should we bid for another one?" "No." The middle-aged man shook his head. "You've already lowered the price for the pill of life extension and toxin cleansing. Lai Changyi didn't increase the price because of Houseu. I'm sure the others are the same. If you continue to fight, you'll lose out. That's not Houseu's style." Lowered? Yuhaitian blinked. "Keep watching and you'll know." The middle-aged man said faintly, "I'm afraid the price this time will exceed 300 million. Yuhaitian was filled with regret at his uncle's words. He was still young and hadn't thought things through. He'd thought that he'd just bid the highest price in the first round, but it was still too low. Under normal circumstances, if there were several similar items being auctioned in an auction, the price of the first auction item would be higher, and the price of the remaining items would decrease accordingly. This was because the buyers had already competed with each other, and the remaining prices would only be lower. But this time, it was obvious that something unexpected had happened. Lu Tianyi wanted to join in the fun, but when he heard the price of 200 million, he gave up. He didn't want to bid anymore. Although the Lu family was rich, a lot of it was real estate and securities, which couldn't be sold at all. Moreover, even if he had liquid funds, he couldn't possibly use them all to buy pills, right? 210 million. A young man from an aristocratic family raised his bidding card after getting the tacit approval of his elders. However, he was immediately looked down upon by the others. Other people increased the price by tens of millions, but he only increased it by 10 million. Wasn't that too little? 250 million. Fatty Lie said generously. Dr. Kong frowned. He'd wanted to bid during the second round, but he didn't expect House Yu to beat him to it. He didn't dare compete with House Yu, so he could only wait until the third round. But judging from Fatty Lie's expression, he was determined to get the pill. Dr. Kong was starting to panic. Linny and Guan Shumin had been sitting the whole time, and it was Fatty Lie who'd stood up and raised his bidding card. No one could see Lin Yi and Guan Shumin clearly, not even Dr. Kong. 280 million. Under Dr. Kang's signal, Kong Guifeng bid a higher price, the same as the 2 pills of life extension and toxin cleansing. He'd thought that Fatty Lie wouldn't compete, but life was full of surprises. 300 million. Fatty Lie clenched his teeth and raised his bidding card without hesitation. The crowd froze for a moment, but they all understood why Fatty Lie would bid 300 million. He'd given up the first time because he'd still have another chance. The second time, it was House Yu who'd made the bid. Fatty Lie didn't want to compete, nor did he dare, so he'd given up. The third time was his last chance, and he had to grit his teeth and fight for it. With that, 300 million wasn't that high anymore. Dr. Kong was so angry he wanted to curse. This Fatty Lie was too much of a bully, wasn't he? He didn't increase the price when Lu Tianyi bid, and he didn't increase the price when Haitian bid. But when it came to Dr. Kong, he raised it to 300 million. With the previous example, Dr. Kong thought that 280 million was more or less within his grasp, but it seemed that things weren't as simple as he'd thought. Dad, what do we do? Kong Guifeng frowned. This is the last pill of life extension and toxin cleansing, and that damn fatty seems determined to get it. Xiao Ji and Xiao Bin, on the other hand, were confused. Elder Kong, is this pill of life extension and toxin cleansing really something good? Dr. Kong didn't answer them, but turned to Kong Guifeng instead. It doesn't matter if he's determined to get it or not. We have to get this last pill of life extension and toxin cleansing. This is very important to our family. I understand. Kong Guifeng obviously knew what his father meant. Once the ingredients of this pill were analyzed, then the day of House Kang's meteoric rise was just around the corner. This might be an ancient medicine that has been lost for a long time. Dr. Kong said to Kong Guifeng before explaining to the Xiao family brothers, after I buy one, I plan to study it. Oh, I see. No wonder it's so expensive. It's a lost ancient medicine. Xiao Ji said, understanding dawning on him. Then we have to buy it. With your knowledge, Elder Kong, I'm sure you'll succeed. Haha, that's not for sure. Isn't the one who discovered this pill some miracle doctor company? They haven't figured it out yet, have they? I can only give it a try. Xiao Ji's words were very pleasing to the ears, and it made Dr. Kong very happy. On the other side, Kong Guifeng had already started bidding. 320 million. 350 million. Fatty Lie didn't wait for the auctioneer to speak, calling out an even higher price. Kong Guifeng froze, a layer of cold sweat forming on his forehead. This Fatty Lie sure was rich, daring enough to raise the price. Continue. Dr. Kong didn't want to spend so much money, but he was rich, after all. Dr. Kang's medical group had close to 500 million in liquid assets, and he could still use it. 380 million. Kong Guifeng continued raising his paddle. Fatty Lie hesitated for a moment, but just when the auctioneer called out 380 million going once, Fatty Lie jumped out again. 400 million. Fatty Lie called out his own price. Chapter 493. Changes in the auction. But Fatty Lie and Dr. Kang's family were at odds with each other. What kind of person was Dr. Kong? He was a tycoon in the medical world, and even he was willing to pay such a high price for a pill. How could it be a normal pill? The crowd was starting to regret not joining the bidding when the first pill was brought out, allowing Lu Tianyi to take advantage of the situation. The price was now at 400 million, and it might not even be the final price. As expected, Kong Guifeng raised his paddle again under Dr. Kang's signal. 410 million. He didn't dare raise the bid too much this time. House Kong only had about 500 million in liquid assets, and if he were to raise the bid too much, they'd run out of liquid assets and their business would be affected. But after Kong Guifeng raised the bid, Fatty Lie didn't make a sound. Those who didn't know the situation would think that Fatty Lie was out of money and was hesitating or giving up. Fatty Lie, however, smiled at Lin Yi. Boss, I think House Kang's at their limit. I'll raise the bid one more time, and they'll definitely be able to keep up, but it'll be hard to say if I raise it again. Yeah, that's enough. Lin Yi smiled. This fatty lie was quite sarcastic, but Lin Yi didn't have a good impression of Dr. Kang's family. He wouldn't stop Fatty Lie from messing with them. 410 million going once. 410 million going twice. The auctioneer paused and looked at Fatty Lie to see if he was going to raise the bid. Dr. Kong was seething with anger. What kind of game was this auctioneer playing? Why was he looking at Fatty Lie if he didn't have the guts to go in for the third time? Wasn't he encouraging Fatty Lie to go against him? However, the auctioneer's encouragement was effective. Fatty Lie gritted his teeth and stood up abruptly, raising his paddle. 420 million. Dr. Kang's heart turned cold. Motherf asterisk Kerr. Isn't this auctioneer too mean? But this was House Yu's auction house. Even if Dr. Kong had something to say, he couldn't say it out loud. He could only swallow his anger and signal Kong Guifeng to continue. This time, Dr. Kong had already decided to bet his treasure on the pill of life extension and toxin cleansing. Judging from the current situation, there were probably only 3 of these pills left. If he missed this one, there wouldn't be any left. Hence, Dr. Kong had no choice but to grit his teeth and bear with it. 430 million. Kong Guifeng raised the bidding board in his hand. 430 million going once. 430 million going twice. 430 million going thrice. Sold. The auctioneer wanted Fatty Lie to continue bidding, but regrettably, Fatty Lie backed off this time. He was out of money and decided to give up. He sat there quietly, not moving an inch. The happiest person right now was Lu Tianyi. He was feeling great. He'd thought that 280 million for a pill of life extension and toxin cleansing was expensive, but now he felt like he'd gotten a great deal. Fatty Lie didn't even get the last pill for 420 million. It was Dr. Kang's family who got it for 430 million, but he was wrong. He thought he was the happiest person, but that wasn't the case. The happiest person was Fatty Lie. He'd played everyone in the hall. These 3 elixirs had brought the company nearly 1 billion yuan in profit. This was an important stage of the company's development. With 1 billion yuan, they could do a lot of things. Fatty Lie did want to bid for one earlier, but since Lin Yi had already agreed to give him one, he didn't want to mess things up anymore. Boss, I didn't think we'd have so much money all of a sudden. Fatty Lie chuckled. Lin Yi didn't think that 3 normal bone and marrow cleansing pills could sell for so much money. Old Lin had packed them into jars for him to eat when he was young. Heh? You won't be left out. Lin Yi was very impressed with Fatty Lie's business acumen. If Fatty Lie hadn't messed things up today, the 3 pills of life extension and toxin cleansing wouldn't have sold for such a high price. Thank you, boss. Fatty Lie nodded excitedly. However, just as the auctioneer was about to introduce the next item, someone from the guest seats spoke up. Good things should be shared with everyone. Little Yu Haitian, ask the seller if they still have the pill of life extension and toxin cleansing. We haven't even started bidding, and the item is already gone. This isn't fair. The person who spoke was the head of the Iron Fist Wu family, Wu Gonggao. His name was very well chosen. Wu Gonggao naturally meant that he was highly skilled in martial arts. It was a bit of a boast, but it was well deserved. He was one of the few remaining mystic class masters in the common world. Only he dared to speak to someone from House Yu like this. House Wu Iron Fist was an ancient noble house. Although they looked to be about the same age as Lu Tianyi's House Lu, for a century-old noble house like this, which one of them didn't have a trump card? Even the head of House Wu, Wu Gonggao's martial arts were enough to shock the audience. Even House Yu was wary of him. It could be said that as long as Wu Gonggao was in charge of House Wu Iron Fist, no one dared to underestimate them. Wu Gonggao rushed over after receiving a call from his grandson, Wu Chan. He was in Yinjing as well, and had come to House Yu's auction, but a head of a house like him would rarely attend the first and second day of the auction. The first 2 auctions were usually attended by the descendants of the house, and he would only attend the last one himself. But when he heard that there was a pill of life extension and toxin cleansing that had a price of 280 million, and that House Yu was making a move, he couldn't sit still anymore. He rushed over to the auction site, just in time for the auctioneer's final hammer strike. Chen Tian, on the other hand, took a look at the introduction of the pill of life extension and toxin cleansing, and immediately felt that it was similar to the long-lost bone cleansing pill in Wulin. His interest was piqued, and he interrupted the auction unwillingly. If it were just a normal noble house's disciple or a rich merchant asking, Haitian would naturally have an excuse to reject him, but the person asking was the head of House Wu Iron Fist, Wu Gonggao, a mystic class master. He naturally didn't dare ignore him, and looked at his second uncle. Ask Mr. Lai Changyi for his opinion. The middle-aged man hesitated before speaking faintly. If there's more, it's fine to take out a few more. We won't take a cut. Chapter 494. Miracle Dr. Guan Medical Company, Limited. In an auction, if an item was sold very well and wasn't unique, then the auction house would contact the seller at the last minute and ask if there were any other similar items to be auctioned. So it wasn't strange for Haitian to call Lai Changyi right now. Mr. Lai, the response to the pill of life extension and toxin cleansing is quite good. Do you have another treasure like that in your hands? You heard it yourself. There are some guests who haven't had the chance to buy it yet, Haitian asked casually. He didn't think much of Fatty Lai before, but his attitude was much better now. I'm sorry, Mr. Yu, but I only have 3 now. I won't be able to bring out a 4th in this auction, no matter what. Fatty Lai said apologetically. Is that so? That's a shame. Haitian sighed. Looks like I'll have to go on stage and explain. Why don't I go and explain? I can also explain why this pill of life extension and toxin cleansing is so rare, Fatty Lai said. Sure, I'll have to trouble you then, Mr. Lai. If Lai Changyi were to personally explain the situation, it would save Haitian a lot of trouble. Otherwise, if someone came looking for him for the pill of life extension and toxin cleansing, even though he was the person in charge of the auction, he wouldn't be able to produce the extra pill of life extension and toxin cleansing. Now that Fatty Lai was shouldering all the responsibility, it couldn't be any better. After hanging up, Fatty Lai twisted his fat body and walked up to the auction stage under everyone's surprised gazes. Greetings, guests. I represent Miracle Dr. Guan's medical company to express our sincerest apologies. Fatty Lai held the microphone in his hand and spoke to the people below the stage. All the guests were dumbfounded. Fatty Lai was from Miracle Dr. Guan's medical company? Then why did he participate in the auction? Could it be that he was selling and buying, driving up the price? Instantly, many of the guests frowned at Fatty Lai's actions. Fatty Lai's actions were very inappropriate. Although there was nothing wrong with it, everyone knew the rules of the auction, and House Yu would take a cut of the profits. But Fatty Lai's actions would damage his reputation. Miracle Dr. Kong was the angriest of them all. Tianyi wasn't that far off, but the price he'd bid was already very cheap, so he wasn't too conflicted. Dr. Kong, on the other hand, was different. That was 430 million. Most of the family's cash flow had been used up, but Fatty Lai had tricked him. The ingredients for this pill of life extension and toxin cleansing are very rare, and the refining process is very complicated. Professor Guan used almost a year to refine 5 pills, and 3 of them were auctioned off. Fatty Lai shook his head as he continued. Fatty Lai's words calmed the crowd down a little. 5 pills in a year, and the ingredients were rare. This pill was a priceless treasure. If it was said that Dr. Kong had refined it, the people present might have doubted it. But if it was said that Guan Shuiming had refined it, everyone believed it. In the eyes of these aristocratic families, Guan Shuiming was already a divine doctor. But weren't there still 2 left? Where did they go? As for the remaining 2, one of them was given to Miracle Dr. Kong by another partner of Miracle Dr. Guan's medical company during his birthday banquet. The other one was taken by my father. Fatty Lai blurted out the whereabouts of the other 2 pills of life extension and toxin cleansing. Naturally, he wouldn't tell anyone that the pill his father took was actually Dr. Kang's. The people who knew Fatty Lai finally understood why his father had recovered so quickly. He was in a coma from uremia, on the verge of death. But now, his body was as good as new. These people beat their chests and stomped their feet, regretting that they didn't act earlier. Now, there were only 5 left, and now they were all gone. Of course, the most embarrassed person was Dr. Kong. His face was burning. He'd just told Xiaoji that the pill of life extension and toxin cleansing was a lost product of ancient times. But now, it was Guan Shuimin's doing. Not only that, but he'd even given you a pill of life extension and toxin cleansing at your birthday banquet. How could you say that it was a unique item? However, Xiaoji didn't voice his disdain because he was on the same side as House Kong. If Dr. Kong was embarrassed, they wouldn't have it easy either. But Fatty Lie's next words made Dr. Kong feel a little better. So, these three are the only three left. I may be the CEO of Miracle Dr. Guan's medical company, but I don't have the right to own a pill of life extension and toxin cleansing. So when I found out about the effects of this pill, I couldn't help but participate in the bidding, but I didn't get it in the end. It's a pity. I see. The guests heard Fatty Lie's words and understood his actions. Fatty Lie really wanted to buy it, and he wasn't trying to mess things up. If they didn't want it, then he would. As for why Fatty Lie raised the price from the start, it was simple. He knew the true value of the pill, and so people dared to bid. But I'll discuss with Professor Guan when I get back. We'll see if we can bring out some other good items to auction in the third auction. Fatty Lie finished speaking and bowed to everyone. Thank you all for your love for our Miracle Dr. Guan's medical company. Our products will be sold after the auction. After that, Fatty Lie walked down the stage. The audience was very interested in the items that Fatty Lie mentioned in the third auction. They were all discussing whether this Miracle Dr. Guan's medical company would bring them any surprises. Guan Shuimin's name had always been resounding among these aristocratic families and wealthy merchants. His acupuncture skills were even more superb, but Miracle Dr. Guan didn't care about fame and fortune. Even if there were people who wanted to get close to him, they didn't have much of a relationship with him. But who would have thought that Guan Shuiming would set up a company with someone else and set up the Miracle Dr. Guan's medical company? Was he going against Dr. Kang's medical company? Or did Guan Shuiming suddenly want to earn money? Chapter 495. Chapter 495. Meeting an old friend. Fatty Lie's words were smooth, but he didn't say a single thing about the actual problem. Whether or not the pill of life extension and toxin cleansing would be available in the future, and when, he didn't say. He also didn't say what items would be added for the third auction, and whether or not they would be added was still unknown. But even with this kind of slick and ambiguous attitude, the people present were still very excited and expectant. Vague things always let people's imagination run wild. You sure know how to talk. That's as good as not saying anything. Linny smiled faintly as he watched Fatty Lie come down. Heh, that's true. How can we just say things like that? It's a trade secret. Fatty Lie smiled shyly. But boss, do you think we'll be auctioning anything else for the third auction? What else? Linny didn't have anything prepared, but it wasn't too late to prepare now. I heard that Dr. Kang's auctioning some special edition golden creation medicine tomorrow. I heard that it heals wounds faster than normal medicine, Fatty Lie said. Why don't we auction some special edition golden creation medicine as well? I've already offended him to death, and once our medicine hits the market, we'll be competitors. We don't have to worry about making enemies with them. Lin Yi's interest was piqued when he heard that Dr. Kong had special edition golden creation medicine in the auction as well. Let me think. Let's see what I can come up with. Let's see if it can surpass his. That's great. As expected of the boss. Fatty Lie nodded repeatedly. That's true. It'd be meaningless if it were the same as them. It'd look like we're trying to copy him. The following auction items were all ordinary items. Of course, this was only relative, because even if these items were to be brought to an ordinary auction, they would be considered top-notch items. It was just that everyone here had seen the world, so they weren't too surprised by these things. None of the bids were higher than the pill of life extension and toxin cleansing. In fact, they weren't even a tenth of the price. Linny wasn't interested anymore, so Fatty Lie left his seat and went to the backstage of the auction to handle the handover procedures. The profits from the 3 pills, minus the money spent on the sheepskin map, were all deposited into Fatty Lie's account. After the paperwork was done, Fatty Lie returned with the map and handed it to Lin Yi. Lin Yi opened it and glanced at it, then put it away. This was not the place to study these things, and Lin Yi did not intend to study them, at least not now. Including the piece at home, Lin Yi only had 2 pieces of the map. He didn't know how big the map was and how many pieces it was divided into, so the 2 pieces he had were practically useless. Linny had asked Fatty Lie to bid for it out of curiosity. He didn't expect the map to bring him any benefits, it was just a spur-of-the-moment decision. The auction ended quickly. Other than the pill of life extension and toxin cleansing, none of the other items had this kind of effect. After a few bids, the auction ended abruptly. There was nothing special about the first day's auction, and it was the same every year. It was just that the pill of life extension and toxin cleansing was a special case. Linny, Fatty Lie, and Guan Shuimin stood up and prepared to leave, but they saw Dr. Kong looking in their direction. His face froze when he saw Lin Yi and Guan Shuimi. Linny nodded at him and smiled. Dr. Kong had long suspected that Lin Yi was a second-generation heir, so he only frowned when he saw him with Fatty Lie and Guan Shuin. As far as he was concerned, Guan Shuimin's business career was all thanks to Lin Yi and Fatty Lie. The investor was most likely Fatty Lie, and this Lin Yi probably had some shares as well. But Dr. Kong didn't think much of it. The person he was afraid of was Fatty Lie, the veteran businessman. Lin Yi. Xiao Xiao couldn't believe what she was seeing. She rubbed her eyes and confirmed that it was Lin Yi. She ran over and cried out in joy. Lin Yi! Lin Yi! Lin Yi turned around and looked at Xiao Xiao, surprised. He didn't understand why he would see her here. Lin Yi didn't believe that Xiao Xiao followed him here, because he didn't see her at all when he boarded the plane. The only possibility was that it was a coincidence. He smiled bitterly. Why are you here? Yeah, why are you here? Xiao Xiao asked at the same time. I'm just looking around with my friends. Lin Yi smiled. I still have something to do. I'll be going. Lin Yi didn't want to get too close to Xiao Xiao. This girl's way of thinking was a little weird, and it made Lin Yi want to stay away from her. Are you coming tomorrow? Are we going to sit together? Xiao Xiao was annoyed. Why was Lin Yi so cold to her? But on the surface, she looked at Lin Yi expectantly and asked pitifully. We'll talk about it tomorrow. Lin Yi didn't want to waste time with her. All right, I'll come find you tomorrow. Xiao Xiao remembered that her dad was still waiting for her. She didn't want to talk too much with Lin Yi, but seeing Lin Yi here gave her an inexplicable sense of excitement. It was a feeling she couldn't quite put her finger on. Meeting an old friend in a foreign land? Or was it a chance for her to make Lin Yi fall in love with her? Or was it because she was bored? At that moment, Gong Gao and Chun Tian walked over briskly. Gong Gao was tempted after learning that Guan Shuimin was the one who'd made the pill of life extension and toxin cleansing. He wanted to talk to Guan Shuimin and see if he could get him another one. Professor Guan, long time no see. I've missed you. Gong Gao was wearing a long robe, looking quite like a martial artist. He cupped his fists excitedly when he saw Shuimin. Haha, Elder Wu, how are you? Shuimin nodded with a smile. He'd given Gong Gao acupuncture before, so he wasn't a stranger, but he didn't act overly friendly or familiar. Shuimin's attitude towards noble houses had always been neutral, and he didn't get too close to any of them. Even the famous House Yu and the Iron Fist Wu. Thanks to Professor Guan, I'm still healthy. But I'll have to trouble Miracle Doctor Guan to give me acupuncture when you're free. Gong Gao said very politely. Chapter 496. A tense situation, that's not a problem, Elder Wu. Just come visit me in Songshan when you're free. Shuimin didn't decline the offer, but he definitely wouldn't go to the noble houses to treat them. Shuimin's temper was something that all the noble houses and merchants knew of. He was willing to see patients, and he didn't care about the fees, but he never went out to see patients. If he was sick, he'd come to Songshan. This was also because Shuimin was also teaching at the University of Medicine and Medicine. In his eyes, he was a professor, and teaching was his duty. So no matter what happened, he couldn't let his students get in the way of teaching. All right, I'll be sure to visit soon. Gong Gao nodded with a smile. Grandpa, this is the guy I told you about. Not only did he seduce Sun Jingyi, but he even pretended to be some bullshit miracle doctor. He's obviously a liar. I even got slapped by my aunt because of him. Chen Tian abruptly realized that Lin Yi, who was standing beside Shuimin, felt an uncontrollable sense of humiliation. He lost his mind instantly, pointing at Lin Yi and yelling at him. Tian had been raised too high by the house recently and was being groomed as the third-generation heir. But it made sense, a young man in his 20s reaching golden class early phase. What kind of achievement was that? He was probably the only one in this world. Of course, that was only what House Wu thought. And so, House Wu put all the benefits on Chen Tian's head, creating his arrogant and domineering personality. He wouldn't take a single loss, and he'd always take revenge. And so, when he saw Lin Yi, he didn't even think before insulting him. Xu Amin's face darkened. In his eyes, Lin Yi was both a teacher and a friend. No matter how bad he was still a senior brother. And so, naturally, he wasn't happy that someone was insulting Lin Yi like that. He looked at Gong Gao and said faintly, "Elder Wu, we'll be leaving if there's nothing else." Wu Gonggao's expression froze. He did not expect that Guan Xuemin would stand up for Lin Yi. He was in a difficult position. Wu Gonggao was famous for being protective of his own people. Furthermore, this grandson of his was extremely talented. Naturally, he treasured him a lot. Whatever he wanted, he would give it to him. No one could say or touch him. Since his grandson was in trouble, he would naturally stand up for him. Who cared whose fault it was and who the other party was? But now, Guan Xuemin was one of the few people he didn't dare to offend. With Guan Xuemin here, he naturally couldn't cause trouble for Lin Yi. He glanced at Lin Yi indifferently and remembered his face, preparing to find a chance to teach him a lesson. However, Wu Gonggao did not say anything, but some people were unwilling and directly blew up the temple. "Who are you calling a liar? Look at you, you're the liar. You're worse than a fart." Xiao Xiao didn't like it when this person insulted Lin Yi for no reason at all. Who was she? She was playing the role of Lin Yi's pursuer, and this person insulted Lin Yi. Wasn't that the same as insulting her for her lack of taste, for falling for a liar? And so, naturally, Xiao Xiao was unwilling. She glared at Chen Tian, and if there weren't so many people around, she would have kicked him. Who was Xiao Xiao? Beating people up was nothing out of the ordinary. Chen Tian was furious to hear that someone was insulting him for Lin Yi. He was about to say something, but when he saw that it was a pretty girl, he couldn't say anything. "Don't get involved. This has nothing to do with you. The young has no manners, and the old has no manners." Xiao Xiao curled her lips. "Hey, old man, your grandson has no manners at all. Aren't you going to teach him a lesson? What did you say, you little girl?" Gonggao's face flashed with anger as he looked at Xiao Xiao coldly, his fist turning into a palm. As the head of the Iron Fist Wu house, he had to teach a junior a lesson for talking to him like that. Where would his face go? Where would House Wu's face go? You old man, what are you doing?" Xiao Xiao was startled. She didn't know martial arts, but she could feel the killing intent coming from Gonggao. Mystic early phase. Lin Yi's heart skipped a beat. Wu Gonggao and Chen Tian were both physical practitioners, so he couldn't feel the energy in their bodies. He could only sense their strength level when they used their physical practitioner's arts. He didn't expect this old man to be this strong. Lin Yi moved his body subconsciously, smiling bitterly. No matter what, Xiao Xiao was standing up for him just now. No matter what her intentions were, Lin Yi couldn't just leave her be. Otherwise, it'd be too much. So as soon as Gonggao made his move, Lin Yi planned to block it for Xiao Xiao. Although the opponent was a mystic early phase, Lin Yi was a golden class late phase peak, and he practiced the art of Dragon Slayer. Naturally, he had the confidence to take a hit from a mystic early phase. He couldn't guarantee victory, but he could protect himself. But Lin Yi's move was unnecessary. The moment he moved, a middle-aged man appeared in front of Xiao Xiao, looking at Gonggao calmly. "Elder Wu, are you going to attack my daughter?" Gonggao paused, his face changing. How could he not know Feng Tianlong? Gonggao took a deep breath, knowing that he couldn't do anything today. It was impossible to teach Xiao Xiao a lesson. What Gonggao was afraid of wasn't Tianlong's golden class mid-phase strength. In the eyes of a mystic early phase, a golden class was nothing. Of course, what he was afraid of wasn't Tianlong's background. The Supernatural Investigation Department was a mysterious organization, and their power was shocking. But that was for normal people. For a noble house like Gonggao, although he wouldn't make them his enemy, he wasn't afraid of them either. What Gong Gao was afraid of was the person who had retired for more than 10 years, Tianlong's former captain. That person used to be a member of the Supernatural Investigation Department's Special Task Force and had brought Tianlong on missions before. He had a close relationship with Tianlong. If it wasn't Tianlong, Gong Gao might not give face to someone else, but he had to give face to Tianlong. In that person's eyes, even an Earth class would be nothing to him, let alone a mystic early phase. Although he didn't know how strong that person was, Gong Gao knew that if he pissed him off, Housewu would be finished. It would only take a day. Pho. Gong Gao let out a long breath and smiled awkwardly. So it's Captain Feng. Why would I attack your daughter? I was just joking. Chapter 497. Was he your boyfriend? Feng Tianlong had just received a phone call when he saw his daughter running over here. If he had come a second later, he would have regretted it. Oh. Xiao Xiao wasn't stupid. She knew that the old man would have done something to her if her father hadn't come. But the old man was clearly afraid of her father, and Xiao Xiao didn't know the reason behind it. She thought that the old man was afraid of her father, and that made her happy. Professor Guan, it's been a while. I've been wanting to pay you a visit in the next couple of days. Tianlong was very happy to see Guan Shuimin there as well. He'd been wanting to pay him a visit in the next couple of days to ask about the pill of life extension and toxin cleansing. Tianlong and Guan Shuimin knew each other, but Guan Shuimin couldn't do anything after checking on Xiao Xiao's condition. He'd heard that even Lin Dongfang couldn't do anything back then, so how could he? But just because he couldn't do anything a few years ago didn't mean he couldn't now. As long as there was a sliver of hope, Tianlong wouldn't let it go. Ah, it's Feng. Long time no see. Guan Shuimin smiled. I'm always free. Just give me a call. Guan Shuimin was noticeably friendlier to Tianlong, and that pissed Gong Gao off. He humphed and pulled Tian away. All right, I'll be going then, Professor Guan. Tianlong had just gotten a phone call, and something came up. He had to hurry back, so he couldn't chat with Guan Shuimin. He'd have to visit another day. All right. Guan Shuimin nodded. Tianlong was about to leave with Xiao Xiao when he saw Lin Yi from the corner of his eyes. His face changed. Huh. Lin Yi smiled bitterly. Tianlong had found him after all. In fact, Lin Yi was shocked when he saw Tianlong. He didn't expect Xiao Xiao to be Tianlong's daughter. Lin Yi kept trying to hide, but didn't manage to do so in the end. Lin Yi waved his hand slightly, gesturing for him to keep quiet. Tianlong was a smart man. He knew that Lin Yi didn't want to expose his identity when he waved his hand, so he pretended not to see anything and pulled Xiao Xiao away. However, the lingering fear from before was gone. Instead, he mocked himself for being too nervous just now. Tianlong saw how Lin Yi moved his body slightly in front of Xiao Xiao, but he didn't think much about it. To him, it was just an accident. He didn't think that Lin Yi was going to block Gong Gao's attack for Xiao Xiao. Now that she knew that it was Lin Yi, she understood that Lin Yi's actions were to protect Xiao Xiao. With his protection, Xiao Xiao would definitely be fine. Tianlong knew how strong Lin Yi was. Although he wasn't Wu Gonggao's opponent, he could still deal with him. Xiao Xiao, do you know them? Feng Tianlong asked without any change in his expression. He didn't understand. How did Xiao Xiao know Lin Yi? From the looks of it, it seemed like they knew each other. Yeah, that Lin Yi is my deskmate at school. Xiao Xiao nodded. Xiao Xiao nodded. Feeling a little weird, didn't her dad care a lot about her? Wah. Tianlong's eyes went wide as he looked at Xiao Xiao in disbelief. You're saying he's your classmate? Your deskmate? Yeah, what's wrong? Xiao Xiao looked at her dad, confused. She didn't understand why her dad was looking at her like that. No, nothing. Tianlong shook his head. Lin Yi wasn't part of the department, but he did cooperate with them on a few missions. But even so, with Lin Yi's identity, why would he go to school? He was a third-year high school student, and his daughter's deskmate? Wasn't this a little too unbelievable? But he couldn't tell Xiao Xiao too much about Lin Yi. He had his doubts, but he could only bury them in his heart. He wasn't too sure about Lin Yi's identity, and it was the higher-ups who arranged for him to cooperate with the department's missions. Xiao Xiao, go back to the hotel first. Dad has something urgent to deal with and might not come back tonight. I might be busy tomorrow too. Feng Tianlong was in a difficult position. He just said that he wanted to play with his daughter for a few days, but now he had something else to do. It's fine. You go. I'll invite my classmate to the auction tomorrow. Xiao Xiao wasn't angry this time. She waved her hand casually. Xiao Xiao's attitude surprised Tianlong, but then he remembered how his daughter protected Lin Yi. Could it be that his daughter had feelings for him? Was she starting to like boys? And that boy was Lin Yi? Thinking of this possibility, Feng Tianlong jumped in fright. But Tianlong didn't object to his daughter's puppy love like other parents, because his daughter's situation was special. Quite the opposite. He wanted her to find a boyfriend and give him a grandson or granddaughter. That way, if something really happened to his daughter, he wouldn't have to spend the rest of his life alone. And his daughter's lover was Lin Yi. Tianlong supported it even more. He had seen how outstanding Lin Yi was. Tianlong wouldn't object if Xiao Xiao found someone else, but wouldn't it be better if she found someone he was satisfied with? Tianlong didn't want his daughter to run around, but if she really was with Lin Yi tomorrow, then Lin Yi would be able to protect her. He wasn't worried anymore. You're talking about that Lin Yi? Tianlong came to the parking lot and asked Xiao Xiao after getting in the car. Yeah. Xiao Xiao felt a little embarrassed. Judging from her dad's tone, he seemed to have realized something. But other than embarrassment, Xiao Xiao wasn't afraid. She was just playing around with Lin Yi right now. Even if she really got together with Lin Yi, she wouldn't care. She had always been a troublemaker since she was young. It didn't matter if her father was angry or not. Xiao Xiao, is he your boyfriend? Tianlong started the car and asked suddenly. Xiao Xiao didn't expect her father to be so direct. She paused and stuttered. No. Feng Tianlong asked back. Didn't you seem to be quite protective of him? We're classmates and deskmates. Of course I'm protective. Xiao Xiao was embarrassed. She wasn't afraid of anything, but she was still a little shy when it came to relationships. Chapter 498. We sell hardcover editions. 2 Chapter 498. Selling hardcover editions, huh? Xiao Xiao's eyes went wide as she looked at her father in disbelief. What? What did you say? What I mean is, Xiao Xiao, you're not young anymore. You should find a boyfriend, right? Tianlong coughed, feeling that this wasn't the right time to talk about this with his daughter. But he had to. Because of Xiao Xiao's special condition, Tianlong couldn't help but have this thought. Other parents didn't want their children to fall in love early, let alone have a child out of wedlock. But Tianlong wanted his daughter to give him a child as soon as possible. In truth, Tianlong knew deep down that there was no way to cure his daughter's illness. Even if he ran all over the place, the chances were slim. Even if a miracle doctor were to appear, extending her life by a few years would be the most he could do. A full recovery was a pipe dream. This was why Tianlong was so desperate for his daughter to get a boyfriend. He wanted to see his daughter's life continue, and he didn't care about anything else right now. There's no need for that, right? Xiao Xiao was even more embarrassed. Why would I get a boyfriend? I won't say much about that. Just take care of yourself. Tianlong smiled and drove away. After dropping Xiao Xiao off at the hotel, Tianlong said a few words and quickly drove away. The people there were waiting for him, so Tianlong had to leave first. Xiao Xiao was alone in the hotel, thinking about what her dad had just said. What did he mean? Supporting her to get a boyfriend? Xiao Xiao felt that it was odd. She wasn't even at the age to get married yet. Xiao Xiao suddenly remembered her special condition. Wasn't her mother the same age when she gave birth to her? Xiao Xiao's hereditary condition was rather weird. It was only passed down to females, not males. If it was a boy, it wouldn't be a problem, but it was a girl. She remembered hearing her father talk about her mother when she was young, and it seemed like her grandpa was in a rush to get her mother to be with her father, and the two didn't even register their marriage before they had her. But her father was a devoted man and didn't remarry after all these years. Her father was probably thinking the same thing as her grandpa back then, right? Xiao Xiao shook her head. But times had changed, and she was still a high schooler. Getting a boyfriend and having a child? Wouldn't that be a little weird? Xiao Xiao had never thought about this before, because as far as she was concerned, in her short life, friendship didn't exist and love didn't exist. Xiao Xiao didn't want to get involved with anyone, and she didn't need other people's sympathy. She didn't want the pain of death. Therefore, in the past 18 years, she had no close friends, only a group of scoundrels. She had never fallen for a boy because she didn't want to face that kind of unbearable pain. But Tianlong's words made Xiao Xiao fall into deep thought for the first time. Find a boyfriend? Can I? Can I like others too? Xiao Xiao smiled bitterly and shook her head. Who would like her? Finding a girlfriend like me who's about to die. Isn't that just bad luck from 8 lifetimes? Before he could do anything, he was already gone. Huh? Xiao Xiao suddenly thought of Lin Yi. If that was the case, Lin Yi would fall in love with her. Even if she didn't dump him, he would still be in pain, right? With that thought, Xiao Xiao made up her mind. Second uncle, Lai Changyi, and the others left. The young man who was bidding against Fatty Lai for the sheepskin map said quietly into his earpiece, Kurin, follow them and see which hotel they're staying at. Then find out who that young man with Lai Changyi is. The middle-aged man beside Haitian ordered. Yes. The young man called Little Kuan nodded. After exiting the auction house, his figure flashed and disappeared into the boundless night. Fatty Lai didn't have a car in Yinjing, and the hotel they were staying at wasn't too far from the auction hall. It was only about a kilometer on foot. Fatty Lai might be fat, but he had a good body. Guan Shuamin had a healthy body, and taking a stroll once in a while was good for his health. Lin Yi was even better. So the three didn't take a taxi, but walked to the hotel. It was a good opportunity for some exercise, and they could get some supper at the hotel's restaurant. Boss, have you thought about what we're going to auction? Fatty Lai reminded Lin Yi. Afraid that he'd forgotten about the auction, Fatty Lai was still thinking about the auction again. I haven't thought about it yet. Lin Yi frowned, deep in thought. Dr. Kong was auctioning off the special edition of Golden Creation. If he were to take out a special edition injury medicine as well, he'd be following the trend. Boss, I think we should make a special edition injury medicine as well. They have it, and we have it too. It'd save us the trouble. Fatty Lai suggested, seeing that Lin Yi was in a difficult position. Isn't that following the trend? Wouldn't we be at a disadvantage? Lin Yi asked. Boss, I don't have a choice. We're still in the early stages of our company, and I don't plan on releasing too many types of medicine. The pill of life extension and toxin cleansing is enough. If we release too many types of medicine, we won't be able to showcase the benefits of our medicine and painkillers. Plus, we need to slowly reveal our trump cards. Bringing them out all at once isn't in line with our business goals, Fatty Lai said. Then let's make it a special edition injury medicine. Lin Yi nodded, already having a plan in mind. Our special edition injury medicine is different from Dr. Kang's. I've added a few herbs into the medicine, and it's very effective on old scars. It can quickly remove rot and regenerate flesh. Huh. Fatty Lai's eyes widened, looking at Lin Yi in disbelief. Boss, is there really such a miraculous medicine? It's not that miraculous. It's just adding a few other herbs on top of the injury medicine. It's just that the cost is much higher. Lin Yi shrugged as he spoke calmly. It's fine if the cost is a little higher. It's a premium product, and we won't add the normal version, Fatty Lai said. According to the price of the special edition Dr. Kang's Golden Creation every year, a box is worth more than 500,000. Oh, that's quite high. It's definitely enough to cover the cost. Lin Yi was surprised. A box of Golden Creation could sell for 500,000. Chapter 499. So low cost. So you're saying that there's more than one box of Dr. Kang's special edition Golden Creation every year? Lin Yi asked. One box? There's at least 20 boxes every year, but it's usually a limited price auction. The highest bid is 500,000, and it goes to whoever bids 500,000 first. It saves the tedious bidding process, Fatty Lai said. Fatty Lai said, 20 boxes, let's see who's faster. The first to bid 500,000 will get it first. So you're saying that each box is sold for 500,000? Lin Yi nodded and continued asking. Not really, but the first few boxes were sold for 500,000, and as the number of bidders dwindled, the price naturally dropped. There were 400,000 and 300,000, Fatty Lai said. 500,000 is fine. Let's see if there's a pharmacy nearby. I'll buy some more herbs. Linny nodded, thinking that the profit was fair. It wasn't as much as the pill of life extension and toxin cleansing, but it wasn't a small amount. Most importantly, it could make a name for itself. Ugh. Fatty Lie was already used to Lin Yi's miraculous feats. Linny was probably the only one who'd concocted medicine the night before the auction. He quickly said, "Then I'll contact someone to buy some high-quality packaging and send it over overnight?" "No need. I'll buy some disposable bottles and put them in." Lin Yi waved his hand. "Let them believe it or not. If they believe it, they'll bid. If they don't, they won't bid." "That's true. There's no need to worry about selling good medicine. What's the point of giving them such good medicine?" Fatty Lie nodded. "It'll save us a lot of money." Huh. Linny thought that Fatty Lie was really made for business. It seemed that leaving the medicine company to him was a wise decision. "Right. What's the market price of Dr. Kang's golden creation?" "Dr. Kang's golden creation is 299 yuan a box, and our injury medicine, I think, will be priced at 288 yuan. Fatty Lie said, "But I don't know what our cost is, so we haven't announced the price yet." "What? We're selling it at 288 renminbi?" Lin Yi's eyes widened. Dr. Kong actually sold a box of ordinary Jinshuang medicine for nearly 300 renminbi. Wasn't this a little too much? Who would be able to afford something that concerned the livelihood of the people if it was so expensive? Lin Yi naturally waved his sword and slaughtered those who didn't like him. But as for those poor people, Lin Yi really didn't have the thought of swindling their money. Too cheap? Fatty Lie was shocked when he saw Lin Yi's expression. "Boss, Dr. Kang's golden creation is only selling for 299. Although the supply can't meet the demand, I'm afraid we won't be able to enter the market if we sell it at a higher price than him. I also know that our treatment is definitely better than his." Linny heard Fatty Lie's words and knew that he had misunderstood. He couldn't help but smile. "The cost of this thing is only a few kwai. I think it's a little expensive." "Quack? How much?" Fatty Lie froze and almost fell to the ground. "Boss, did I hear it wrong? A few kwai? How is that possible? Then isn't the cost of Dr. Kang's golden creation also a few kwai? I don't know about his. I've never seen it before." Linny shook his head. "But this is our cost. I suggest that we sell it at a lower price so that normal people can afford it." "All right, then we'll be a company that benefits the people." Fatty Lie clenched his teeth and said with pain, "Then we'll sell it for 199. He was an unscrupulous businessman, but since Linny said it, Fatty Lie couldn't insist. From his point of view, 288 would definitely sell well, and there might even be a situation where the supply couldn't meet the demand. 199? In fact, Linny still felt that it was a little expensive, but he didn't know how much money a company needed to operate. Seeing Fatty Lie's painful expression, he nodded. "Okay." Fatty Lie let out a sigh of relief. He was also afraid that Lin Yi would cut down another 100 kwai and make it 99 kwai. Then the profit would be much lower. "Then I'll make a plan. The next time we auction our products, we'll announce the retail price." Fatty Lie nodded. "Boss, how much do you think we should set the price for the painkiller?" "The cost of one dose is around 50 kwai. Of course, it'll be lower if we mass produce it." "You decide the price," Linny said. "Okay, then we'll set a box of 5 at 199 kwai." Fatty Lie probed. 99. Linny said after some thought. "Okay, I'll listen to you, boss." In fact, Fatty Lie was afraid that Linny would bargain with him, so he set the price a little higher to give Linny some room to bargain. After confirming the price of the 2 drugs, Fatty Lie was relieved. Most importantly, he knew the cost of the drugs, which made him even happier. This meant that Linny had already treated him as one of his own, and he was slowly telling him some of the core things. They passed by a larger pharmacy, and Lin Yi and the other 2 walked in. Lin Yi didn't use a prescription, but just dictated some herbs and let the attendant weigh them. Of course, although Linny had built up some trust in Fatty Lie, it wasn't complete. When he was filling the prescription, he purposely added some useless herbs, and the dosage was also messed up. There were also a few main herbs that Linny didn't mention. He only mentioned a few uncommon ones, but the attendant shook his head. "It's okay. There are a lot of pharmacies in Yanjing. Let's go take a look at other pharmacies." Fatty Lai quickly said to Lin Yi. If it's not okay, I'll get someone to buy a car and send it over. No need for now. Let's go take a look at other pharmacies first. Lin Yi smiled. After filling the prescription, Fatty Lai rushed to pay first. It wasn't much, just a few hundred yuan. Guan Shuamin didn't say anything, and he didn't try to remember what Lin Yi bought. He was an honest man, and unless Lin Yi showed him the prescription, he wouldn't take the initiative to ask for someone else's prescription. Not long after the three left the pharmacy, the young man named Kuan looked at Lin Yi and Fatty Lai's backs. He hesitated for a while, and then flashed into the pharmacy where Lin Yi bought his medicine. It was a straight path, and there weren't any crossroads on either side. That was why Kuan entered the pharmacy. Otherwise, he wouldn't have risked getting lost. Waiter, may I ask what the three people bought just now? Kuan asked the waiter in the pharmacy politely. Chapter 500. Someone's following you, Fatty Lai. Bring Grandpa Guan to the shop next door and wait for me. I'll go take care of something. Lin Yi suddenly stopped and ordered Fatty Lai. Oh, okay. Fatty Lai didn't know what Lin Yi was going to do, but Lin Yi didn't seem to have any intention of explaining. He didn't press the matter, and so he brought him to a store not far away. Lin Yi, on the other hand, turned around and walked quickly to the pharmacy he'd bought his medicine from. Lin Yi didn't expect to be followed on his first day in Yinjing. I'm sorry, sir. The attendant smiled sweetly at Kuan. Our pharmacy has to keep our customers' privacy confidential. One had to admit that Kuan was extremely handsome. He looked like the male lead in Korean dramas, and the attendant couldn't help but take a few more glances at him. Kuan frowned. His looks had always been a lady killer, and he thought the attendant would tell him the truth. He didn't expect her to keep it a secret. Still, Kuan didn't give up. He took out his wallet and took out a few hundred kwai bills, placing them on the counter. Pretty lady, give me some face. That guy was my buddy, and I don't know where he got this recipe from to buy my dad's medicine, but I don't know what he bought, and I'm afraid my dad might get sick from eating it. I want to make sure. I see. The average-looking attendant's heart skipped a beat. Kuan's looks were pleasing, but the money on the counter was even more alluring. It was quite a temptation for a working girl like her. Her monthly salary was only 1,000 kwai, and Kuan was giving her 500. It was hard for her to refuse. After some hesitation, the attendant quickly put away the money and took out a list from under the counter. She placed it on the counter. You can copy it, but you can't take it away. Kuan picked up the list and glanced at it. He had an extraordinary memory, and it didn't take long for him to memorize the names of the medicines. He returned the list to the attendant. I'm a medical student, and I can't tell if there are any conflicting medicines. There's nothing special, and there's no problem. I'll return it to you. Thank you. Oh, all right. The waitress breathed a sigh of relief. This was the first time she had done something like betraying a customer's privacy. She was not used to it. After hearing Xiao Kuren say that there was no problem, she immediately felt relieved. Moreover, he only took a glance, so there should be no problem. Goodbye. Beautiful, thank you. Xiao Kuan turned around and walked out of the pharmacy. However, as soon as he walked out of the pharmacy, his face froze. Because he saw Lin Yi standing in front of him. Why are you following me? Lin Yi looked at little Kuan and asked calmly. Lin Yi didn't want to cause any trouble in Beijing, but since someone was following him, Lin Yi couldn't just ignore it. Facing this kind of unknown danger, Lin Yi would usually choose to take action first. However, the jade didn't warn him, so this person shouldn't be too hostile towards him. So, Lin Yi gave him a chance to explain and didn't kill this golden class mid-phase master right away. The person in front of him was at most in his early 20s, but he was able to have the strength of a mid-phase golden class. It was really not easy. Following you? You must have mistaken me for someone else. Xiao Kuren was only slightly shocked, but his expression returned to normal. However, there was a trace of surprise in his eyes. He didn't think that Lin Yi would find out that he was following him. Xiao Kuan didn't deliberately hide himself when following these three people, but with his strength of the mid-phase golden class, it was a bit surprising that he was found out. Really? You better not be. Lin Yi shrugged and remembered Xiao Kuan's appearance. In the end, he gave up on the idea of killing him. Being in a foreign land, Lin Yi didn't want to attract too much trouble. Since this person in front of him didn't seem to have much hostility towards him, Linny was only warning him. As long as he didn't follow him, it would be fine. Looking at Lin Yi's back, Xiao Kuan frowned. He couldn't figure out how this ordinary-looking young man in front of him could find him. However, it was obviously a bit inappropriate to follow him now. Xiao Kuan could only call his second uncle. Second uncle, they found me. Oh? The middle-aged man was slightly taken aback. They found you? They have a master bodyguard? I'm not sure. I don't know how they found me, but I was stopped by that young man. He asked me if I was following him. Xiao Kuan was also very depressed. It was really like the saying, always walk by the river and you will get your shoes wet. He actually failed miserably. He thought that it was a very simple tracking mission, but it was seen through by someone else. Forget it. You can come back. Since you know that Lai Changyi is with Guan Shumin, it's fine. The middle-aged man thought for a moment and said, you pay attention to their company for a while. Tomorrow, I will find a chance to test Lai Changyi and see what his purpose in buying that map is. Okay, second uncle. Xiao Kuan nodded and disappeared into the night. He didn't tell his second uncle about the pharmacy. Lin Yi came to the boutique. Guan Shuamin and Fatty Lai weren't actually there to buy anything. They were just casually looking around. When they saw Lin Yi, they went up to him. Is it done? Fatty Lai asked. Yeah, it was nothing. I just met an acquaintance. Lin Yi smiled and didn't tell them about the person following him. He didn't want Fatty Lai and Guan Shumin to worry. Instinctively, Lin Yi didn't think that Kuan was coming for him. Maybe he saw the future of Miracle Dr. Guan's medical company at the auction and followed him to see if there were any discoveries. Especially since he just came out from the hospital, it was obvious that he was going to find out what Lin Yi bought just now. So, Lin Yi thought that Kuan was trying to pry into business secrets and didn't think about the map fragment. Fortunately, Lin Yi was careful and didn't buy all the herbs at once. It saved him a lot of trouble. In fact, even if Lin Yi bought all the herbs, it wouldn't be of much use without basic injury medicine. Only when it was added to injury medicine would it have the effect of healing old scars. On the way, they passed by another pharmacy. Lin Yi went to buy the rest of the herbs. Fatty Lai didn't seem to have any intention of writing them down, which made Lin Yi feel relieved. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.